3 decades have passed since the appearance of monsters, yet today the monsters aren't a problem anymore, seeing how those who are blessed with superpowers dealt with them. This also marked the dawn of an international sport known as the Hunters League, and our hero entered the stadium of the raging crowd, loaded up his gun, as the projectors shined upon his glasses, seeing how he was a top-tier player. Yet then again, due to his full performance last summer and his inability to pass the qualifications, it seemed like all of his great achievements were suddenly forgotten, for 2 simple reasons, leaving our hero quite frustrated. As he threw his phone away in a pulse of anger, it all happened in front of the man sitting face to face with him. The man then decided to speak to Changman, stating that he might have reached the end of his professional career, leaving the protagonist startled. The man stated that he wanted Christopher to retire from gaming and focus on business before reminding him of his mandatory military service. Just like that, the devastated protagonist began to think of how it would have been better if he was just fired from the team. He knew very well that one day he would have to retire, how his sharp skills would surely fade away with his youth. Yet that again, it was a scandal to be asked by his manager to become a figure with no power of the team that he had been leading to victory alone all this time. Now full of rage, Christopher burst out, kicking the table, startling his manager. Just like that, the hero began to walk away, stating that he was done with this conversation. This made the manager lash out, claiming that the hero should show some respect instead of keeping on this attitude that made the fans demand his leave. But upon hearing the manager claim that he regretted making something out of someone like him, the young man froze in place, and so he turned back and angrily walked towards the terrified man. Before grabbing him by the collar, Christopher reminded his manager that he was the one who had given their institution all of its success. Our hero then began regretting being once persuaded by his manager to activate his full bloom while a teen, as this skill's power would increase with time, allowing the user to unlock great power, only to stop his progress once activated. This made the businessman claim that he only did what he judged was best for the young man. This greatly angered Christopher, who pushed him away, leaving the man shivering in fear. The protagonist knew very well that the manager was the cause behind his misery. But then again, beating him up couldn't repair his past mistakes. Just like that, our top-tier gamer had reached rock bottom, as this marked the end of his great career. Our hero couldn't grow more powerful anymore despite having a decent arsenal of high-ranked skills. With that, his only option was to grow old, along with the skill that was activated too early, preventing him from improving. Christopher began wondering if life still had its meaning. He began to think, as he crossed the road, if death wouldn't actually be a deliverance, when suddenly the protagonist found himself face to face with a speeding truck. Christopher assumed that even if his life truly had a meaning, it wouldn't be worth living as the impact became imminent. Just like that, the horror occurred, driving the truck off course, only to crash this side of the road, which resulted in a great explosion. Meanwhile, our hero found himself heavily injured. His clothes were on flames as he fell on the ground. This made him rethink his most recent philosophy, seeing how he truly desired to keep on fighting, even if it was for a little while. Christopher desired to be adored by the crowd once again on the stage after his victory in a great match once again. The hero desired to share those happy moments with his team. And yet now tears rolled down his eyes as he found himself on the brink of death, thinking of how he wanted to live his life without shame. This accident was the last thing the legendary player could recall from his first life. Just then, the protagonist felt confused, as he was now in his room, yet the atmosphere felt odd. And so he rushed to the mirror only to find that he now looked like his old middle school self. Just then, a lady opened the door and asked Christopher if he was prepared. Our hero was left shocked as his mother had also regained a youthful appearance. The lady asked her son if there was something wrong, and he quickly brushed it off. Christopher finally realized that he had been rewound to the past. Upon coming to this realization, with the young man feeling overjoyed as he got to relive his past glory days, only this time he wouldn't make the same mistakes once again. The talent for hunting was determined by asserting physical strength by the use of state-of-the-art technology. But the advanced machine, while still unable to identify the nature of the Awakener's skills, this forced the Awakener to theorize about spells and come up with a way to deploy them. But our hero was spared from this burden due to his all-seeing eye. That night, our hero lay down on his bed and checked his system window. His full bloom had regressed to rank A, just as he had predicted. Yet he wasn't worried about it, seeing how skills could be trained and the equipment could be bought once again. But our hero's main concern was his need to adapt to his pitiful physique and low-ranked skills, when suddenly, he heard someone arguing about something. The man stated that the hero was free to live his life as he liked, yet his mother refused, stating that he was too young, which is why the man demanded a year of trial. Then they explained that a year was too long as her son could fail his classes for not having enough study time for a dream that might never be achieved. This made the protagonist recall how his mother originally opposed his dream of becoming a hunter, yet he couldn't waste his time arguing with her. But just then, it came to his attention that one side of the argument stated that 1 year could be a very important period. The child realized that his mother was speaking the truth, as in a year a hunter could play numerous matches, gain experience, and upgrade skills. Before thinking of how this full bloom would have reached B rank if he had started earlier, allowing his gaming career to take a turn for the better. and so he barged in on the conversation, stating that he required 6 months to prove himself to his mother, leaving the both of them shocked. The woman grew worried, while the man's expression lightened. Christopher affirmed that he would demonstrate his talents to his mother. Then our hero was baffled as he was denied access. The lady explained how minors require the authorization of a guardian in order to access the facility. This was a detail that had slipped our hero's mind, seeing how he was well over 18 and had passed life, leaving him annoyed as it meant he couldn't train today. And just as he was about to ask for a solution around it, he was tapped on the shoulder. Christopher found himself being greeted by a cheerful young man, the one he recognized as Dojun Kim, who asked him about the reason behind his presence. According to the protagonist, he was a close-range hunter who had an easy life for being an elite of the first division linked with the pros despite not being number 1. Yet our hero had to claim that he didn't know of him, seeing how at this period of time they were supposed to be total strangers. So the young man introduced himself to the hero, stating that their classes were next to each other and that he was well known within the school as an awakener. Yet as the protagonist claimed that he had never heard of him, the young man was left shocked, and so Dojun Kim decided to accept the situation. Before asking the protagonist if he was here to enter the Hunter Youth Club, he claimed to be here for the training room, where guardians were needed. Dojun Kim stated that he had the authority to grant our hero access, seeing how he was a member of the Academy Youth Club, which our hero didn't know. Christopher realized that everything had its price as the young man demanded to see him train. Despite it being an inconvenience, the protagonist decided to accept, seeing how nothing was truly at risk. With that being said, the lady asked him to use Training Room 3, seeing how a member of the youth club had accepted to be his guardian. Later on, the voice stated how he was surprised to see that someone other than him at school wanted to be a hunter, leaving the protagonist shocked as he was referring to him. Dojun Kim stated once again that he was part of the Hunter Youth Club, which he had a hard time fitting into, as the other members were older strangers. Before asking our hero for the reason behind using the training room that no one enters, so he explains how it must be due to everyone's fixation over the Hunter League. Christopher then asked the boy if he truly wanted to watch him do some regular training and put his skills to the test. Yet, as Dojun Kim suggested to lend a hand to his schoolmate, the protagonist quickly realized that he had always been craving attention. But then again, the protagonist couldn't accept, seeing how he was a reincarnation, making him years older than the middle schooler. With that, everything had been set. The training session had been programmed, and so it began as a bright light appeared, almost blinding Dojun Kim. With that, the tanker clone that our hero invoked began to appear, and if real life could be compared to a video game, this entity would be considered a training unit. Yet it wasn't quite the same, as it summoned its massive shield, stating how its defense was so impenetrable that it was almost impossible to damage it. Dojun assumed that the training had been programmed wrongly and suggested that he use a regular clone instead, as the tanker was currently unscratchable. Yet as the protagonist summoned his weapon, he claimed that his schoolmate was speaking nonsense, affirming that training dummies should be durable. Christopher then insinuated that the monster was only unscratchable. For Dojun Kim, as he cracked a wild smile, the easiest method for one to break a durable material was to hit it with something even more robust. Yet seeing how this was currently impossible for our hero, he was left with only one solution to bring the tanker to its knees, which was to aim for its joints. Just like that, Christopher went for his first spear thrust, successfully landing a hit on the tanker clone. This left the protagonist pleased as he had good mastery over his own body, and so he decided to resort to his all-seeing eye in order to locate the weak spots of the training dummy. And so Christopher focused for a moment before charging at the virtual monster, successfully slashing its arm and its waist before dealing the final blow. Just like that, the unscratchable training dummy fell to the ground in pieces, marking the victory of the young spearman. His astonishing performance made him regret not having filmed the training session. Dojun Kim claimed that our hero was victorious as he lowered the defense of the tanker to its minimum, otherwise he would have required a special weapon. The legendary player realized that the middle schooler came up with his own explanation upon witnessing something that he couldn't comprehend. Dojun Kim claimed that the hero, who must be specialized in spearmanship, was worthy of the youth club and that he would also take a swing at the training dummy. Christopher decided not to enlighten the young one on his achievement, seeing how he will realize how hard it is by himself. Later that same night at the facility, Dojun Kim, exhausted and confused, thinking of how he had replicated Christopher's exact movements. When facing the training dummy, the middle schooler had lowered the monster's defense to a minimum, which left him more intrigued, as the clone, despite how he charged up at him at every attack, was left unscratched. That same night at the facility, training was still going on. The middle schooler assumed that he had programmed the training wrong, when suddenly someone called him. A senior in the club demanded to be properly welcomed, and Sir Dojun Kim politely bowed to Jisoo. Just then, the young man noticed that his teammate was trying to attack a tanker clone. So the young Kim explained how he wanted to warm up before their training session, making Jisoo call him out for warming up with such a training dummy, before affirming that the young one would never be able to damage it even if he set its defense to the minimum. Making Dojun Kim grow frustrated by his own weakness, After that on the train, the hero began to think of how much he lacked strength, as the general-purpose Hunter Center granted Awakeners the regular training facilities. Once alone, our hero tried to take a swing at the monsters of the Hunters League, as well as the spotting partner feature. This made our hero aware of his own need for power, seeing how his all-seeing eye was B rank, forbidding him from using powerful attacks. With his physical abilities slightly surpassing those of a commoner in good shape, the hero was determined to work out in order to increase his own strength, as he began to think of how his recovery was fastened by his full bloom. Christopher was well aware that practicing was his only way to get power, seeing how he needed his guardian's approval in order to use the Hunter Center training room, which was very inconvenient. And so he reached out for his smartphone in order to search for a place where he could practice on his own, when suddenly he received a call from Dojun Kim. The young man immediately asked the protagonist if he was going to train, leaving him intrigued before proposing to treat him to dinner. A little while later at the best hangover soup, Dojun Kim waved to his schoolmate who had just arrived. Christopher pointed out that the young man must be loaded, which he immediately confirmed. According to the young Kim, a wealthy background made the road to Hunter way easier, which our hero couldn't deny, seeing how equipment and tests were pricey. Yet then again, our hero couldn't help but realize that the middle schooler in front of him was exactly like the man he knew in his first life, seeing how he always craved attention. With that being said, the protagonist asked the young man to cut straight to the chase, which he couldn't quite understand. So Christopher affirmed that this invitation today was the result of some kind of pity. Dojun Kim affirmed that it wasn't the case, stating that he had something to ask our hero. The protagonist called in the waiter after having guessed that the middle schooler had problems with the training dummy. Dojun Kim explained how he failed to take down the tanker clone despite replicating the prodigy's movements, which is why he decided to ask him for some advice. But just then, he interrupted his own speech and began to look down upon noticing something which greatly intrigued our hero, who turned to see what it was. Just then, 3 young men wearing outfits similar to Dojun Kim, which meant that they were on the same team, entered the restaurant while badmouthing him. The middle schooler couldn't help but feel embarrassed, seeing how he was being mocked for trying to beat the tanker clone. Jisoo explained how he asked the young one for his reason behind this training, and how he explained how a friend of his took it down, yet he didn't believe him. As the mockery kept going on, the protagonist realized that it was Dojun Kim's elders that were standing in the way of his growth, and so he decided to act, before loudly explaining how one doesn't need to alter the settings in order to take down a tanker clone, and that the task wasn't challenging at all if the right method is used. The protagonist then praised his friend for trying to take down such a mighty opponent when others claim that to be undoable, seeing how they themselves were too weak to achieve it, ultimately triggering Juzu. As the young man began to talk about the academy, he stood up. Dojun Kim tried to silence his friend in time, yet it was too late. Jisoo then placed his feet on the table before asking his teammate to stay silent. He then called out our hero for badmouthing them and claimed that an attack from an awakener like him could easily kill the protagonist, before giving him 3 seconds to do what he must, which made Christopher feel odd, seeing how Jisoo was acting like the average thug in movies. This left the protagonist ultimately annoyed as he stood up, seeing how it meant that he wouldn't be treated to dinner. Christopher then approached Jisoo, before casually punching him in the face, leaving his 2 friends startled and shocked, and so they quickly rushed to help him get up. The legendary player began to think of how he had used the time limit well, seeing how he would always aim to take the first blood. With that being said, Jisoo grew annoyed and was left ultimately triggered. So the hero explained that despite him being a teammate of his friends, he had no relation to him, which is why he should leave him alone. The provoked young man tried to strike our hero, only for him to gracefully dodge. Christopher then recalled Jisoo affirming that one of his attacks was enough to take down our hero, before insinuating that they still had to connect, filling his opponent with rage and anger. But Jisoo's punch was quickly deflected by our hero, who quickly counterattacked with a left jab, seeing how he couldn't win in hand-to-hand combat. The triggered young man decided to use other measures, which startled our hero as he realized what was soon to happen. Jisoo then began to gather his mana. The protagonist's all-seeing eye, which could detect danger and weakness, began to alert him, and so he used a jump to dodge at the last moment as the ground beneath him began to crumble. Upon seeing the state of the floor next to him, the hero realized that he was going up against a gravity bender, which made him realize that Jisoo truly planned on resorting to his skills, despite the presence of the commoners around them, which Dojun Kim rushed to evacuate. With that being said, the young man released his energy once again, in order to deliver another gravity attack that our hero dodged at the last moment, leaving him alerted, as he had almost been smashed by a flying table. Despite Christopher's wish to go easy on the young man, he was left with no choice as he addressed him, before firmly affirming that his time had run out. The gravity wielder then responded in return that he should be the one saying that before unleashing yet another attack, that our hero managed to dodge once again. Christopher was left in a tough spot, as despite his eyes allowing him to dodge the attacks of the gravity wielder, he was still unable to reach him, and so he decided to take other measures, as he grabbed a plate lying on the floor. Before throwing it with all of his strength at his opponent, our hero had tossed a plate at his opponent, only for him to crack a smile, as he used his gravity manipulation in order to stop the plate before letting it fall. Jisoo then affirmed to our hero that such trickery couldn't work on him, when he suddenly received a plate of food to the face. The protagonist, who kept on throwing plates, affirmed that his opponent should try and evade them, ultimately leaving him angered. Christopher began to think of how every skill possessed a cooldown, while his adversary was being overwhelmed by the incoming plates, and about what would happen if this cooldown wasn't respected. At that moment, Jisoo's hand began to tremble as he was now unable to use his gravity manipulation, allowing our hero to hit him once again in the head with a plate, as he was now defenseless without his skill, seeing how he didn't respect the cooldown. Our hero's craftiness had greatly irritated his opponent, when suddenly Jisoo realized that the hero had disappeared from his sight, and suddenly someone shouted heads, leaving the boy to panic as he covered his head while still being confused at the source of the voice, when suddenly he was punched by none other than our hero. And just as Jisoo called him out for attacking his stomach and instead went for his skull, Christopher shouted heads once again. This startled the boy, who wondered about the next attack, and so he decided to cover his stomach, thinking that the protagonist would attack it once again, only for Christopher to punch him in the head. The protagonist kept on shouting heads as he continued to imprint his left fist on Jisoo's. Shortly after, the young man had lost consciousness, and so our hero decided to stop the beatdown. But just then, something that caught his attention left him startled. Upon looking at the set of the restaurant, he affirmed to himself that he wasn't the one that made it in shambles. If then again, it was our hero who had thrown the first punch, and he wasn't harmed while his adversary was left beat down and unconscious. Christopher began to think of a plan, seeing how the two friends of his opponent as well as his own companion had left the place. Suddenly, the police arrived at the scene, which startled the protagonist. With that being said, only one solution remained, and so he dirtied his face, got the bully up, and threw water at him in order to wake him up. Jisoo opened his eyes only to find the beginner lying eyes closed on the ground, leaving him utterly confused. Yet despite the entanglement, he decided to get his revenge on his opponent anyway, when suddenly someone arrived with the police. Dojun Kim pointed the officer at the scene. Jisoo quickly realized the kind of situation he was caught in, as his supposedly defeated opponent begged for his mercy, and so the officer pulled out his stun gun in order to arrest the young man. This left the protagonist quite pleased, as he had successfully fooled the officer, allowing him to escape all troubles with the police. Christopher also realized that the bully wouldn't contradict his story, seeing how he would be too ashamed to admit that he had lost to him. And even if he decided to unveil the truth, the state of the crime scene was playing against him. Afterwards, at the training center, someone began to talk about how hard it was for Jisoo, which was none other than Dojun Kim, who explained how he had been scolded by the rest of the team and how he is rumored to be soon expelled from it. This pleased our hero, as injustice had been avoided. His friend then asked him if he was going to take some time to rest, but Christopher quickly summoned another clone, stating that he couldn't afford such luxury. Our hero stood tall in the face of effort, while his friend just accepted the situation. Christopher firmly grabbed his weapon, thinking of how full bloom granted him a new talent upon accomplishing a great achievement, which meant that he was now in possession of a new skill. With that being said, Christopher charged at the monster, jumped into the air, and shouted heads. The new awakened talent named Calling Your Attack allowed the hero to shout the name of a random skill or target in order to enhance his attacks. This new power allowed our hero to split the clone's head, marking his victory. And while this friend is shocked, he began to think of how he was surprised to see that it was considered an achievement to take down a bully. But the most intriguing part was the fact that he didn't possess such talent in his previous life. This odd skill that pushes him to shout the name of the target will surely make him look odd to others. Later that night at dinner, it was stated that the protagonist will be going to a hunter survival show audition. He confirmed it to his parents, stating that he wanted to show them his value, seeing how he could finally register for Hunters, Next Generation, a reality show that uncovers and tutors the hunters of the future. And while the worried mother stated that the competition would be fierce since it was a division, the father affirmed that his son should take the risk, making his wife call him out for taking a similar chance and driving his business to ruin, ultimately causing an argument in front of their son. Christopher explained how winning would grant him a tailor-made weapon, a great sum of cash, and enrollment at the academy or entering a Division III team. The mother stated that it was only natural, seeing how fierce the reality show would be. Yet her child cheerfully affirmed that he was going to work as hard as possible, leaving both his parents shocked. And so they agreed to let him participate, yet the mother stated that he shouldn't be surprised if he doesn't win. The hero knew very well how fierce the competition would be, as this show was used to select the best candidates for the Hunter League at a national scale. It is due to this that some unfair facts presented themselves to the highest ranker, seeing how the TV show has the goal of picking the best newbie. Yet he didn't want his parents to be worried for him, seeing how in his past life he had won numerous tournaments. And so he was certain to defeat a mere bunch of newbies. That's when we see our hero holding 2 guns, as he was now taking the 3-minute clone test in Hunters, the Next Generation, which he obviously managed to pass with ease. Before that, we see 3 persons sitting at a table talking about how they will soon put their hands on the applications. Judge Arajo asked Minsuk of Hunters Next Generation why he decided to take the position of judge after claiming to not want it. Minsuk Lee explained that despite being successful on an international scale, he wanted to focus on his homeland, hoping to find a talented amateur. The third judge, Suyuk Min, stated that if the man lived up to his claims, he should be participating in the pro leagues and that the academy provides great amateurs. Minsuk Lee, upon hearing this, pointed out that those with real talents were the eccentric ones that will shine under the right guidance. Arajo explained to the federal judge how they needed to focus on the contestants rather than the league, yet pointed out how her opinion would change if she ever saw the great potential of Ethan, but she decided to brush it off as their voting power was the same. After opening the site of the TV show, the hero began to read how now this program wanted to find the players that will shape the future Hunter leagues. Yet his main concern was the fact that a written test was the first audition that he had to take. Upon seeing how detailed the questions were, Christopher assumed that they would surely please academic students. For the first question was about his occupation before his hunting career, so he explained how he didn't have any. The second was about his preferred method when dealing with a problem in a group, so he explained how he always takes the lead and forces the others to comply. The protagonist then drank a cup of water before continuing. Our hero was now in a tough situation as he expected the auditions to be easy, yet the written test turned out to be quite hard. Yet he was certain to repair this disaster with the use of a potential practical test, when suddenly he found something intriguing, as in order to access the third part of the audition, he needed to click a link. And just as he pressed the button, he was suddenly transferred into another space, making him think of how the skills of a hunter are based on his personality and experience, which left him intrigued seeing how mind-blowing this skill was. The young man, who was now alone in his room, began to wonder about the nature of the skill, while it explained how he needed to defeat clone waves in 3 minutes. According to the scale, the hero's weapon will be shaped by his imagination, and so he began to think, only to let out a smirk as he had crafted dual pistols. The hero was pleased at the idea of a practical test. In his past life, the protagonist's favorite weapons were dual guns that he imbued with his arcane power, yet he realized that it wouldn't be possible in this test. Just as the test was about to begin, our hero quickly activated his all-seeing eye, and so a first wave of clones, which were much weaker than tanker clones, appeared, marking the start of the test. With that being said, Christopher aimed his guns and began to shoot at them as fast as possible. Meanwhile, someone found it scandalous. Judge Arajo asked Suyuk Min if he also didn't accept this type of behavior. The man agreed with her, making her affirm that this wasn't the intended purpose of the test upon watching our hero's performance. As according to her, Christopher was hacking, seeing how any hunter could clear the wave of clones if he had guns in hand. Arajo then added that his answers on the question of the written test were also unacceptable. She angrily affirmed that the young man was problematic, seeing how he didn't take the question seriously. The man had no choice but to agree with her, as guns wouldn't usually be the weapons of the hunters. These weapons are not very effective against monsters, seeing how hard it was to imbue them with mana that would disappear from the launched bullets, which is why most hunters use close-range weapons. Long-range weapons are present in the hunter leagues, but only the slow ones such as bows and crossbows. According to Minsuk Lee, only someone as talented as Ethan could quickly shoot a massive number of bullets filled with mana, and so he affirmed that he was intrigued by the protagonist, leaving his colleague intrigued. And to the second judge's shock, the third one agreed with the first, as even if the young man didn't mean it, he did manage to find a way to bend the rules to his advantage in an unusual way. Minsuk Lee agreed with him, pointing out in the other rounds if they didn't like his performance, before stating that the protagonist and Ethan had a different way of thinking regarding firearms. Arajo asked him to clarify, yet he himself was confused. The judge theorized that the young man might see potential for guns in the hunter leagues, but he quickly ditched the idea. Minsuk Lee began to think, as he watched how the protagonist opted to take the rest of the test with a single gun. The judge deeply hoped that he was wrong about Christopher. Meanwhile, someone asked about the outcome of Jisoo. Dojin Kim explained how the main protagonist didn't have any serious injury, which felt odd to the man, as the boy in question, despite not being powerful in close-range combat, possessed a strong skill, yet his opponent only suffered minor damages. While he seemed like he was in a pretty bad state, the man decided to focus on the boy in front of him, asking him if he will participate in the TV show, and said that he wanted to tell him as it will take some time. The one with the blue shirt, who was overwhelmed by curiosity, asked Dojin Kim if his friend that fought Jisoo also entered the TV show. So he explained how he was unsure, seeing how he didn't ask him yet. With that being said, the coach dismissed the young man, stating that he must be busy getting ready for the upcoming show. Just like that, the young man excused himself. The coach began to think about how the situation became more fascinating. As Dojin Kim walked down the hallway, he also began to think of how the gravity wielder will take part in the show, which will only make things more exciting. The sun shined brightly on the main stadium of the reality TV show. Upon arriving in front of it, our hero began to think of how many years had passed since he had started his career in this stadium, and so he decided to walk towards the old place once again. in order to face the new challenges that are yet to come. The Hunter Leagues had 3 divisions, with the highest having its matches in towers, while the 2 others used a virtual reality stadium. At first, our hero couldn't wrap his head around the reason why such huge places are built. But upon seeing the crowd present today, he realized that the answer was occasions like the occurrence of this reality TV show. Among the crowd, a focused qualifier of the program Hunters, the next generation, Hangil Yun, sat in silence, while another one named Hyeju Yu patiently waited for the event to begin. At the same time, a third qualifier named Minsong Jang let his eyes loose within the stadium. Christopher, who began to think of how this show took place before the beginning of his career in his past life, was surprisingly filled with some old acquaintances. Yet to his surprise, familiar faces resided in the crowd, some of them who had great potential. This made him curious about this event's winner in his past life, seeing how he was going to win this time regardless. Suddenly, Christopher was called by Dojun Kim, who waved at him from the crowd next to an empty seat. Just as the hero sat next to him, the boy checked on him, revealing to have assumed that his stay at the hospital would have been long, making the protagonist realize that during the incident at the restaurant, he must have seemed pretty injured to his friends. Dojun Kim revealed that the gravity wielder, who was now on probation, was stated to fully recover from his last fight in 3 weeks, which intrigued the hero. And upon seeing the bully among the participants, he grew even more confused. So his friend explained how he was forced to, seeing how pro teams used this show to scout academy students with potential. Thus, he needed to impress them. The show was now on the air. As fog began to fill the stadium, the commentator explained that new adventurers were always welcomed, before welcoming everyone to Hunters, the next generation, claiming that the promising careers of the amateurs are about to commence as the fog dissipated while all the actors had been pointed at him. With that being said, a virtual battlefield appeared in the stadium. The commentator claimed that this show was the greatest on Earth, as it will uncover the finest hunter of the future, and that each one of his participants had surpassed numerous other awakeners within the country. The man then demanded the crowd to praise the young hunters, seeing how they were among the 2% who were accepted as the future hunters of the nation, before deciding to present the 3 judges to them. The first one being Arajo, a great Korean hunter who had won the National League 3 times. The second one was Min-seok Lee, the greatest Korean hunter who takes part in the international leagues. Before presenting the third judge, Soo-yeok Min, who was a celebrity within the country. Dojun Kim was shocked to see the greatest Korean hunter in the jury, as he was supposed to be taking part in foreign leagues. The protagonist realized that these 2 judges were truly important figures, as they shared the same importance as him in his past life, and yet he was certain to be able to best the both of them. The commentator then explained how the amateurs will partake in challenges crafted by the judges, and the one who comes out on top will earn $360,000, as well as a tailor-made weapon by the Moora's workshop. Upon hearing this, the hero was left blown away, as the regular items crafted by the Moora's workshop were priceless, let alone a tailor-made weapon, leaving him more and more shocked. This made our hero theorize that this would allow him to recover his prime in a much shorter time than what he had in mind. Arajo decided to explain the first challenge to those 100 who were selected out of the 4,450 applicants in order to determine who was truly worthy. With that being said, she excitedly explained how the young ones will partake in a survival battle in a dungeon where actual hunters partook in combat, and that the challenge would reach its end once 80 participants have been eliminated, before affirming that in the dungeon named the Land of the Lost Souls, the one with the highest score will receive a little bonus for the next challenge. Just like that, the 100 members had been teleported into the dungeon in order to start the first challenge. As he was being teleported, the hero was left excited. Just like that, our hero set foot in the Land of the Lost Souls. He quickly began to look around, thinking of how finals were once played in this dungeon during his past life. Christopher knew everything about the Land of the Lost Souls regarding its nature and map, as well as core mechanics. The hero was even aware of the hidden dungeon. With that being said, he let out an excited smile, before wondering about his next action. Arajo was certain that our hero couldn't bend the rules to his will within a survival game, as one could consider how the young man effortlessly passed the practical test as proof of his intellect, yet she didn't believe that he was a genius. The lady was now concentrated, seeing how survival games relied on numerous vital skills proper to hunters, making it impossible for a fraud to win it. Arajo's goal aimed to show the boy that the League of Hunters should be taken seriously. The other 2 began to talk about how talented these amateurs were and how wisely their colleague chose her challenge, as it will only keep the skillful hunters, when suddenly they noticed something odd. Upon looking at the screen, it turned out that one of the hunters was leaving the battle area, and so the 3 judges decided to check on it. The screen then revealed that the rogue player was none other than our hero in front of an odd structure. Christopher had a crazed smile on his face upon witnessing our hero on screen. The lady was left baffled, seeing how he was aware of this location, as it was the place where the artifact of the dungeon was dwelling. Artifacts were a series of diverse treasures concealed within dungeons, Sometimes, if one just manages to get his hands on the artifact, he could ensure himself the win. This left Arajo panicking, as not even Division 1 players should be aware of this dungeon, which was never unveiled to the public, let alone amateurs. Thus, it would be impossible for this young man to be aware of the hidden artifact. Min-Sek Lee whispered to his colleagues, stating that they should intervene if there was some kind of problem, yet she affirmed that there wasn't any. Before explaining how the contestant was entering a concealed area of this replica of a real dungeon, which is unknown to everyone, thus not on the map. Upon hearing this, the man asked her about the items stored in this secret area. After pausing for a small second, Arajo explained how it contains ether, something forbidden in the Hunter's League due to its great power, leaving the other two judges utterly shocked. The artifact couldn't be removed unless the match is stopped, yet since everything is virtual, it could only be used within it, according to Arajo, making Min-Sek Lee point out how a keeper must also dwell in the secret area with the artifact. Keepers were guardians who shielded the artifact, with their power being proportional to their guarded item. The relieved lady decided to take a look at it. With that being said, the judges began to zoom in inside the hidden dungeon, only to find a shining structure. The monster named Q was the guardian of the hidden artifact. Upon pushing the right stone, Christopher was left relieved as the secret path had opened. Despite not remembering it well, our hero managed to locate the hidden dungeon, thinking of how taking down the keeper would allow him to obtain the powerful artifact, which would ultimately grant him victory in the first challenge as he entered the hidden dungeon. Just then, the keeper began to shine with a bright light, before reconstructing itself and launching a powerful beam at our hero, who dodged it at the last moment. This startled the young man, who realized that he might have lost to the keeper now if he hadn't fought it in his previous life. According to our hero, this cube had been labeled as a futuristic device found in the ruins of a tower. Christopher once defeated it in the final match, allowing him to take the win, and seeing how he had discovered it, he was able to use the forbidden artifact. With that being said, he enchanted his sword in order to turn it into a crowbar, using his arcane weapon transmutation that allows him to reshape his weapons. Christopher realized that the principles were alike in his past and present life. With that being said, he charged at the monster, aiming to attack it with his crowbar, and so he stuck his piece of metal between the spaces of the mini cube, before forcibly separating them. The hero then kicked the piece that he had separated and hit it with his crowbar, before doing a flip in order to gain his distance. After regaining the ground, Christopher was pleased to have obtained a fraction of the monster, before thinking of how challenging it would be for him to defeat a keeper with his current capabilities. That this cube reshaping itself was in fact a device created to protect the relic, which is why one could take it down if he was aware of its attack pattern. Just like that, the keeper reformed itself into two giant hands. The hero managed to dodge the monster at the last second as it tried to crush him between its palms. The player was startled by how near death was despite being aware of the attack pattern. But he then cracked a smile, thinking of how he had successfully grasped the opportunity as the keeper began to crack, before suddenly falling into pieces. Right before the protagonist evaded a crushing, he managed to sneak the stolen fragment between the giant palms. Naturally, a piece of a robust monster is just as strong as the rest of its body. The young man then picked up a piece of the remains of the keeper, thinking of how obvious it was that the monster would destroy itself by crushing a piece of his own body. With that being said, the hero decided to get his hands on the powerful artifact. The ether was placed on a golden shrine, inside a luxurious chest. Despite knowing that it is just a virtual copy, the hero was still happy to see this artifact once again after a long time. Everything was going just as the prodigy player predicted it. Just like that, he had acquired the artifact of the land of the Lost Souls dungeon. Christopher quickly decided to imbue it into his blade, but just then, something got his attention. This scenery caused him great joy. With the system considering taking down a keeper a feat, he had obtained a skill that allows him to replicate the power of the artifact outside the dungeon. Christopher quickly decided to put it to the test as he used his skills in order to create pistols. The protagonist quickly began emptying the chamber of his firearms, leaving 3 distinct holes on the wall of the dungeon. This left the genius player overjoyed, seeing how this allowed him to regain his firearm much sooner than what he had originally expected. In his first life, our hero's large mana reserves allowed him to use guns by creating an average of mana bullets. His earning skill Full Bloom, which was not activated yet, allowed him to boost his own progress, yet also resulted in smaller mana reserves than what he was used to. And yet, as he tested his new pistols, he began to think that the artifact that he had just found would allow him to ignore his lack of mana. Upon examining the wall, the hero realized that he could handle pistols yet wasn't ready for heavy artillery, even though they let out a smile, as his current capabilities were more than enough to carve his way. Meanwhile, upon watching this from the monitor, the 3 judges were left amazed and speechless. Arajo was stunned to see the young man use firearms once again by resorting to the artifact. This made the second judge point out about our hero's mysterious ability to evade the attack of the keeper and how it piqued his interest. as the third explained that due to the keeper being a machine, its moves could be predicted, yet it wasn't likely that our hero could be aware of its pattern. Arajo explained that pros like them could pull it off, and seeing how it was impossible for a beginner, she assumed that he had a clairvoyant skill in his arsenal. Yet this wasn't the only intriguing matter, as the way our hero decided to take down the keeper by using a shard of its own body against it was simply amazing and baffling, and so upset, she let out a frown. This made her remember the words of her colleague, the gardening eccentric one being the truly talented hunters, ultimately leaving her frustrated. Back in the land of the lost souls, a young man was moving quickly from branch to branch, jumping as fast as he could, as it was none other than Hangyeol-yun. The young man decided to look up, and upon seeing how he had the highest kill score as well as the #1 spot, was left pleased, seeing how all was going according to the projection of Team 1 from the capital's private academy. Hangyeol-yun regained the ground, thinking of how the first trial should be over after a few more eliminations. It then appeared to the young man that none could stand in his way in a 1-versus-1 fight as he made his way through the forest, when suddenly loud gunshots were heard, leaving the young hunter shocked. Meanwhile, our hero wondered if he was too late, seeing how 20 contestants should be eliminated before the end of the round. The hero thought that by killing all contestants, he would achieve victory, yet seeing how he couldn't find them all in time, he decided to aim for 5th place. And just as he decided to out every contestant that he sees, something odd got his attention. The protagonist had spotted the bully from before. Jisoo was hiding in secret within the tall herbs, and just as one of the contestants came within his range, he clenched his fist in order to snag the young man with a surprise gravity attack. Jisoo let out a sly smile upon eliminating the young man, before coming out of his hideout and heading towards the crater that he had just created, when suddenly he was tapped on the shoulder by none other than our protagonist, who had previously beaten him up, leaving a chill to run down his spine. Jisoo tried to turn and face our hero, only to fall on the ground out of fear. The top player affirmed that he had a favor to ask the bully, yet upon hearing it, the young one was left revolted and angered by our hero. This reaction didn't please Christopher, who stated in a friendly way that he was here to ask for Jisoo's aid, and yet the young one was showcasing his arrogance. Hearing this filled the bully with rage, and so he used his power in order to attack our hero. As the gravity struck at the last moment, our hero managed to escape it unharmed. Christopher wanted the young one to use his gravity attack on a wider area with reduced strength in order to let him finish all contestants at once. But from the looks of it, Jisoo didn't seem to be willing to comply. With that being said, only persuasion was left in our hero's arsenal as he charged at the young man, as he yelled the word heads, giving him the worst impression of deja vu. And so Christopher kept on pounding Jisoo until he had finally given up. The bully asked the protagonist what he saw from him, to which he responded by claiming to want an alliance, which the gravity wielder immediately refused. Upon hearing this, the protagonist spawned a gun with a smile on his face, before aiming it and shooting it right next to the young one's leg. Christopher then pointed it at the head of the young man and stated that he would have to take him out if he chose to not comply. After thinking for a second, Jisoo forcibly accepted to help our hero, leaving him pleased. A little further in the dungeon, 2 young contestants were clashing blades, when suddenly they were approached by 2 shadows. The spearman and the swordsman found themselves the victims of a sneak gravity attack, right before the both of them got taken out by our hero's bullets, leaving Jisoo rather annoyed. Just as the party of 2 began to walk away and they were spotted by someone, when suddenly a flying blade was launched at them, which they quickly sensed, leaving them startled. And so the gravity wielder used his skill in order to stop the flying sword mid-flight. Christopher cracked a smile upon seeing how the loud sound of his firearms had attracted other contestants. Just like that, the party of 2 found themselves in front of a team of 4, with one of them being the talented Hangyeol-yun. With the Hunter League being a team sport, some players were better at defense, and despite the offensive capabilities of the bully's gravitational skill, its best use was for support and team combat, which made the judges wonder if the protagonist was going to eliminate Jisoo, who secured himself a spot on the leaderboard. Yet Arajo explained that it wasn't likely, seeing how he would have already done it by now. The 3 judges then realized that the 2 young men were conversing. As the lady realized that the young man was recruiting the bully as support, her colleague was intrigued by this selection as they shouldn't have met before. This made Minsuk Lee theorize that the boy could assess the other Awakener's skills, but quickly ditched the idea. According to Suyuk Min, this alliance will be very efficient as the protagonist could eliminate contestants immobilized by Jisoo with his firearms. Yet Minsuk Lee stated that this combination wasn't as flawless as it seemed, stating how they were up against a powerful hunter. Meanwhile, the duo found itself facing a quartet. This made our hero think of the best way to overpower someone in a fight, and that it hasn't something to do with strategy, coordination, or equipment. The most efficient way to ensure victory was for one to overwhelm his adversary with sheer numbers. With only a gravitational user supporting his side, the protagonist was sure to fall. Our hero realized that this was the team of 4's train of thought. Just then, Christopher found himself dodging a flying sword. The top player affirmed that he hadn't experienced such a battle in a while before pointing out how it was the first time for his adversary. The talented hunter stated that he would eliminate our hero, seeing how he was using guns, before stating that it was only professional as he launched his weapon once again. This left our hero thrilled, as in his first life, the adult Hangul-yun could use his sword telekinesis on many blades at once, yet his teenage self could only control one, which should make it harder to deal with the incoming bullets. The sword manipulator soon took refuge behind a tree in order to shield himself from the bullets. As Jisoo began to run the other way, the hero pointed out how the promising one was relying on his tactic more than his adult counterpart. Just then, the protagonist evaded the incoming sword slash, before slamming the rest of his attacker with his guns, stating that he was still a green hunter. Christopher then snuck up behind the hunter, affirming that a gun wielder like him will certainly hit his target at close range before shooting him down. With that being said, the young man began to run, as the levitating sword followed him, and so he resorted to his all-seeing, which allowed him to uncover the hiding spots of the remaining hunters that he shall eliminate when the promising one tries to defend himself. With that being said, he jumped into the air and aimed his gun at the first contestant before ultimately shooting him down. He then turned his gaze and immediately spotted the archer, who was left in a state of panic. With a single press of the trigger, the girl was eliminated. Just like that, our hero had eliminated his 7th victim. He then began to think of how he was the only one still standing, as he shot his bullet at the flying sword, making it fall on the ground. It was none other than the irritated, talented hunter who had recalled his blade. The protagonist then spun his guns, before unleashing a barrage of bullets, yet Hangul-yun managed to use his sword in order to block them all. Even when considering the guns being slow due to his lack of mana, our hero couldn't help but be impressed by the reaction speed of his adversary. But then again, Christopher began to think that he was much faster than him as he unleashed yet another barrage of bullets. This time, the promising hunter had a hard time deflecting the incoming attacks, and so the young man kept on shooting while the swordsman was stuck defending. Upon focusing on one of his deflected bullets, with his all-seeing, the young man used his firearms in order to hit it back, launching it once again at high speed. Only this time, the projectile was spinning, as this was a trick shot. The bullet was about to hit the hunter, who struggled to defend himself. With that, Christopher assumed that victory was his, but just then, an alarm noise was heard. Just like that, the 20 survivors of the first round were teleported to the podium, leaving our hero very annoyed, seeing how he had almost taken out a worthy foe. With that being said, the judges were now on screen. Arjo thanked the contestants for proving themselves as hunters, which only makes a small fraction of the awakeners. Her colleagues said that they didn't want players for the league, but protecting warriors like the first hunters who risked their lives on their journeys, before stating that the first round must have demonstrated a fraction of the true meaning of the word hunter. With the next round being unveiled 7 days from now at the stadium, the young ones were asked to reflect on their weaknesses and use the free training room. Yet as the final scoreboard appeared on the screen, our annoying protagonist was left utterly confused, as after looking closely at the scoreboard, he realized that he had only secured 5th place by eliminating 7 contestants, which left him very irritated. Just then he noticed that he had completed the mission, thus Full Bloom gifted him a copy of the legendary artifact. Just then, our hero was approached by his friend, who pointed out how he had made it to 5th place. Christopher asked the young one if he managed to qualify, which he confirmed before stating that everyone was left intrigued by the protagonist using pistols before asking him how he got them. The hero gave a shady answer, which satisfied his friend, who then asked him about how he managed to make them fully functional when someone called the protagonist, asking him to prepare himself for the interview. Shortly after, as the camera was set in place, the interviewer asked the young one to look at him. He then asked the first question regarding the hero's reason for this TV show. The young one stated that he found himself to be the most suitable contestant. The man congratulated our hero for passing the first round before asking him for a review, so he stated that he had passed despite his disappointing performance. Christopher was then asked if he had found himself any rival within the first round, yet to the interviewer's intrigue, he affirmed that none struck his attention, and despite being wary of the sword levitator, he wouldn't bring himself to call him a worthy opponent. Upon hearing this, the man called him out for not being first in it, speaking as such, making the protagonist boldly affirm that it was only amusing if he doesn't dominate this leaderboard from the start. His odd, confident behavior piqued the interviewers and the cameraman's intrigue before deciding to resume the interview. Later in the cafeteria, Dojun Kim seemed annoyed, so Christopher asked him to speak his mind, making him reveal how annoyed he was by the interview, so the hero asked him about the questions. The young one explained how annoying it was that the interviewer tried to compare him with his senior, which our hero could totally understand, as unlike him, he couldn't badmouth Jisoo despite the fact that he was always bullying him. The protagonist was then left shocked upon learning that Dojun Kim affirmed to the interviewers that he sees him as a rival. This made Christopher wish that the gravity wielder was selected for this spot instead. Dojun Kim then asked the legendary player about his interview, so he explained that they asked him the warning questions like his prediction on the last round's winner, making his friend grow intrigued. Christopher explained how he had naturally predicted himself to come out on top. Dojun Kim explained how he had predicted Hanju Yu or Hangul Yun, our prodigies even among the finest team of the academy, to win the first round, as they were both vital members of the team who could easily carve their way to the professional leagues. The blonde one affirmed to his friend that he would understand him if he had seen them fighting in the academy. And so with that being said, the protagonist angrily called his friend out for thinking that those two supposed prodigies were better than him, leaving Dojin Kim surprised, and Christopher affirmed that doesn't change his way of thinking. He will never amount to anything, which is why he needed to change his mindset as he got off the table. With that being said, the hero decided to go train first before asking the young one to enjoy his meal. As he left the cafeteria, Christopher realized that he had been too hard on his friend and how this talk didn't harm him, seeing how everyone possessed the same potential except a handful of people. And in the end, the winners are determined by the determination to reach the goal. The legendary player was very much aware of how much harm a teenager could do to himself by underestimating his own capabilities. And just then, he was tapped on the shoulder by a young hunter who presented himself as Han Jin, someone who always loses his spars with the same sword prodigy that he rivaled in the first round before asking for his name. The hero introduced himself and asked the young one what he sought from him. Han Jin pointed out how the prodigy was left exhausted after the first round, but just then, Hangul Yun affirmed to him that they should get on their way. And so he grabbed his friend by the collar, before apologizing for his rude behavior when he asked the hero to unveil his secret stamp, leaving Christopher confused. Seeing how the both of them were from the academy, the protagonist couldn't help but feel that they were good friends, and so he decided to use his all-seeing eye in order to check the stats of the sword prodigy, as well as his friends. After throwing his cup into the trash, the young man began to think of how the stats of the academy students greatly surpassed his own. He was very well aware that the artifact was the only thing that granted him victory in the first round and that the next one would be much more challenging. A little while later, the commentator affirmed that the TV show will now commence in an exciting voice. The camera was then directed to the three judges who began taking a look at the applications. Suyep Min began to take a look at the file of a student from the Academy of the Capital. Arajo pointed out that this young man was the finest among the contestants, as it was no other than the sword prodigy himself. When interviewed, the young one affirmed that he always aspired to become a hunter despite having failed the entrance exam of the academy twice, before affirming that he kept on going and that he had learned from his past mistakes, as well as learning the true value of hard work. Dojin Kim was watching the interview closely on his smartphone. His friend asked him if the show had already started, which he confirmed, stating that the technological advancement allowed them to air the show early. The hero asked about the comments, so the blonde one revealed how people were fond of the forwardness of the prodigy despite his boring answers. Some other contestants opted for more exotic responses according to the commentator. Just like that, our hero found himself on screen. When asked about the challenges in his life, the young one affirmed that he had it pretty easy. With the next question being about one's attitude regarding team play, our hero affirmed that he always forced the others to follow his lead. When asked for the reason behind joining the reality TV show, the sword prodigy gave a modest answer while the protagonist showcased his arrogance. And when the question regarding a rival popping up in the first round came up, the both of them denied having found anyone worthy. Just then, the screen went completely black. Christopher wanted to resume his training while his friend stated that he wanted to see the part about the first round. But the protagonist affirmed that he could watch the show later. Dojin Kim asked the protagonist why he was only working out his lower body. Christopher then rhetorically asked about his own role within the game, which his friend pointed out to be a marksman. He then questioned the young one about the most vital factor for a marksman, which he stated to be high damage. But the legendary player affirmed that mobility was just as important. He affirmed that the sword prodigy and the other talented close-range fighters possessed either mobility speed or a ranged attack that threatens marksmen, which is why our hero needed his mobility to match or even surpass that of a close melee fighter. Just then, an arriving person stated that this was an interesting point of view, but then again, there were only a few plots within the Korean hunter leagues to eliminate the marksman. The man asked the boy his opinion regarding his statement. Christopher quickly realized that he wasn't in the presence of an ordinary person, seeing how he was free to enter this facility, and so he'd explained that, against some foreign teams, a marksman are always placed on a pedestal, pointing out how crucial this role is. Upon stating this, the hero affirmed that this reason was sufficient for him to only train his lower body. This response amused the old man, as it meant that the young one was insinuating that he will be prioritized by the enemy male fighters for being a marksman, and burst out in laughter, stating that this was rather amusing, before getting back to seriousness, and affirms the protagonist that pride was the main reason behind the demise of many. The old man, who stated that he will observe our protagonist, asked him to take his advice coming from long experience into consideration, before walking away. The two young awakeners were left intrigued as they couldn't recognize who this old man was. Even so, as he resumed his training, Christopher stated that he will try to impress him, seeing how he will be observing his performance. Later on, the subordinate came to check on his boss, who asked him about the vital factors of marksman, which she stated to be damage and support skills. Yet the boss, who was Juntaek Lee, the first-generation hunter chairman of the Hunter Association, explained that this wasn't the case. And so the subordinate pointed out that accuracy must be the main factor, yet as he began to explain it, the chairman quickly brushed him off. With that being said, he began to recall a memory of him asking someone about only training his lower body. In his youth, he asked an archer if he was going to train his mana, to which he replied by stating that the most vital trait for his role was the lower body, leaving his friend confused. The archer explained to Jumtaek that marksmen were always prioritized by monsters, as they were known to be weak, which is why they must be quick on their feet. The simplicity of the reason left the young one amazed, so the archer explained that marksmen are doomed if their hiding spot is uncovered, and that he wouldn't understand it as he was a male fighter, which made him finally realize in the present how important mobility was in sports too. The chairman knew very well that this concept rarely applied in the league of his homeland, which had lost the majority of its best hunters. Yet this concept applied to the elite leagues as well as in the international ones. And this made the chairman think of how the young one was thinking on a worldly scale. And despite not having debuted in the Hunter League yet, with that, the old one was left to wonder if the protagonist was overestimating himself or just perfectly asserting his own skills. Meanwhile, Christopher, who checked his status window, realized that his sleeping Full Bloom granted him a much faster progress rate than the one he had in his first life. Full Bloom mainly accelerates the growth of one's stats, as well as granting him skills as a form of reward for his achievements. This remarkable skill also granted one's stats a great boost upon being activated. Dojin Kim finally placed down the weights, before asking his friend about his plans for the post-workout and if he had anything in mind for him. The protagonist knew very well that his friend, who was a student at the academy, didn't need to train as hard as him, as his stats were already pretty good. And so he affirmed that he didn't have anything to tell him, seeing how they aren't close enough yet, which made sense to the young one. With that being said, the protagonist suggested to his friend to spar with him. Shortly after, inside the training room, the two middle schoolers found themselves face to face holding swords. Dojin Kim was shocked to see that the marksman also knew swordsmanship, so Christopher explained how he had some idea about it. The blonde one knew very well that he would have lost if his opponent used pistols, yet he was certain to achieve victory if the both of them crossed blades. With that being said, our hero smirked before charging at Dojin Kim. Just like that, steels were clashed against each other. The both of them were on par with each other. Upon seeing this, the blonde one began to tremble, and so after looking at his hands, he decided to take a few steps back. Dojin Kim was left utterly confused, as despite Christopher using an ordinary blade, he had a hard time dealing with him. With that being said, the hero used his arcane weapon transmutation on the sword in order to change its shape. Upon seeing that Christopher had now created a spear, the young one began to realize the gap between them. Christopher then swung his weapon, which his friend immediately blocked. Dojin Kim found himself in a tough situation, seeing how his opponent now had a range superior to him. The young one even began to fear the worst upon seeing his opponent morph his weapon once again. To his shock, Christopher was now in possession of a giant sword. Upon seeing the colossal weapon, Dojin Kim failed to think of a way to overpower it. Just like that, the giant sword had been swung. Shortly after, the blonde one found himself exhausted when the protagonist began to speak to him. Christopher wanted to know Dojin Kim's opinion about him, seeing how he had been declared his rival. Dojin Kim added that there was little difference between them, which the hero found ridiculous, stating how he wasn't going all out against him, giving the boy a shock. Christopher seemed very serious. This filled the young one with frustration upon seeing how huge the gap was between him and his friend. With that being said, the protagonist decided to award the reason why his opponent had lost, stating that he was taking on the wrong role. Christopher decided to look at the strengths of the young man and compare them with the sword. He explained how his friend had good reflexes as well as a quick mind, which were incompatible with the weapon of his choice, and so the hero proposed to switch his main weapon to something more suitable for his quickness, like a rapier. With that being said, the hero morphed his own sword into the said blade. According to the legendary player, Dojin Kim should always gain the upper hand on his opponent by using a barrage of fast thrusts. This left the young one amazed, wondering if he was truly able to master the rapier. Later that day, as they exited the training ground, the both of them began to discuss the subject of the rapier. Just then, our hero noticed someone mocking a hunter for being proud of himself after sparring with a weak academy student. Upon seeing the bad mother in front of a screen, the hero was left shocked, as it meant that this young man was spying on their sparring session. Having realized that the awakener in question was him, our hero assumed that the bad mother must not be fond of him. Christopher, who couldn't tolerate such behavior, stated that the young man couldn't beat the weak academy students. This angered the bully, which only made the protagonist provoke him more and more, before proposing to settle their differences in combat, which the bad mother immediately accepted. But just then, our hero realized that this young man had the same score as him during the first stage, and that his were pretty much decent. The hero was well aware that if he fought with his power alone, he would surely lose, as his stats were miserable compared to his. Even so, our annoyed hero was certain that he wouldn't need his signature weapon in order to achieve victory. Shortly after, the both of them found themselves face to face in the training room. The hero was well aware that his opponent Junsung was one of the finest newbies and that his guns were pointless, as they aren't a secret anymore. Junsung suggested to start the match, which our hero immediately accepted, thinking of how his victory wasn't guaranteed. Yet even so, the protagonist wanted to see it through to the end as he launched the first attack that the young man quickly evaded. After gaining some distance, Jun-sung launched 2 knives at the hero, which he quickly batted using his sword. Upon seeing this, the bully cracked up a smile as 2 knives targeted our hero's back. This startled Christopher, who realized that he didn't have time to evade. Just then, the projectiles were deflected, leaving the hero relieved as the replica of the copy of the artifact created a shield that saved him, yet he was left unsure of a way to take down the knife thrower. Jun-sung was using telekinesis in order to guide his projectiles. Upon seeing how his attack was mysteriously deflected, the young man assumed that his opponent had a secret skill of his own. With that being said, the protagonist created a throwing knife of his own and launched it at the bully, who found it laughable, seeing how his skill could easily neutralize the knife. Just like the other projectile, it was stopped with course. Everything was going just as our hero had predicted it upon using his all-seeing eye. Christopher then pulled out more knives and threw them at the body, thinking of how the first attack managed to neutralize his skill. But the startled Jun-sung reacted quickly, leaving our hero shocked as he had used his skill in order to stop 4 projectiles. Yet the bully should not be able to neutralize many targets using his skill in such a short moment, meaning that the knife he had little control on was certainly fated to hit him while he focused on utilizing the others. Just like that, the telepath was hit, marking the victory of the protagonist. The entire spar had been monitored in silence. Someone asked the judge if this was the one he predicted to take first place. Min-suk Lee asked the blonde one about his opinion, and so he adjusted his glasses before using his skill Eye of Analysis. According to the man, our hero possessed a great tactical intellect and a tricky spirit, as well as somewhat average stats according to the Eye of Analysis. It was just as Min-suk Lee predicted it. The blonde one realized that the judge had some kind of idea about the prodigy's skills, stating how he couldn't have achieved victory if he wasn't already aware of his opponent's telekinesis. Min-suk Lee theorized that the young one possessed a skill similar to the blonde one's or even Samnak Kim, one of the first hunters. The Eye of Analysis was a powerful skill that only 2 individuals were blessed with, and while the blonde one explained that the judge might be overestimating the young one, Min-suk Lee affirmed that they might be downplaying his abilities, seeing how he had discovered the concealed dungeon within the survival game, before informing him of how he had targeted the cloned circuits within the practical test. According to the judge, people would assume him to be the returned Samnak Kim himself if he ever enters the Division 1 League. The man then asked the blonde one if he wanted to take the prodigy under his wing, which he confirmed, as Eye of Analysis was able to reveal stats, not skills. Even so, the boy successfully predicted his opponent's skill and created a plot to counter it. The man even began to recall how smart the knife trick was, as he asked him if he had already been placed on a team. The judge affirmed that it was unfortunate, as it had been decided by the sponsors of the reality show, leaving him annoyed as he was determined to get the young boy. Meanwhile, inside the training room, the protagonist was left confused, as he couldn't understand what the system considered as an achievement. Even so, he decided to take his time to unveil this mystery. Dojun Kim excitedly stated that he might best our hero with his new weapon, that the hero walked away, stating that it was ridiculous, making the blonde one point out how he had gotten stronger. Dojun Kim affirmed that his swordsmanship had never been better, which our hero couldn't deny, seeing how efficient his advice was. Even so, a huge gap of levels still remained between the 2 of them. With that being said, the 2 middle schoolers exited the training room. The cameras were all set inside the classroom. Just then, the door was opened and someone entered, which was none other than Dojun Kim, and the protagonist was wondering about the reason behind their presence in a classroom. Made him assume that they were going to be lectured. Just then, the 3 judges entered. Arjo saluted them, stating that she hoped that they had trained well in these 7 days, and that while some might have greatly progressed, others might have not been so lucky. Even so, according to her, all of the young ones still had a long way to go. Her colleague explained how despite their potential, they were so far more weak than the professional hunters. For this reason, the judges had created a team of instructors. After the teachers made their way into the class, the judges stated that each of the assigned teachers had participated in the highest league and accomplished numerous feats, and that the instructors would help the young ones develop in their proper roles before a 3-on-3 test match like the Hunter Leagues. Just then, our hero felt overwhelmed, as well as the rest of the 19 contestants due to the power of the teacher's mana manipulation, leaving him impressed. The first one, named Seongjin Lee, presented himself as someone who couldn't stand lazy and undetermined people, before firmly affirming that he loathed arrogance, which is why he demanded the students to show humility and not make fun of the lectures. The judges then pointed out that they used the first round of elimination in order to assign each of the young ones their proper roles, with the first being our protagonist, who was stated to be a close-range fighter. Upon hearing this, Christopher was left baffled. Later on, the gunner still couldn't understand why he was considered a close-range fighter. He then noticed that he was in the presence of the sword prodigy, Haiju Yu, as well as his friends who were all hunters with great potential. The teacher then appeared in the training ground, before screaming that they should forget everything they know, seeing how they were all inferior to Division 3 hunters regardless of their academy. The instructors then explain how in official matches everyone uses skills and items like air anchor and air bit for better performance, and that while the rookies were still crawling on the ground, the weakest division of hunters are able to fight in the air. This made Christopher think of how this would make the hunters put on more of a show by using the fancy mana-activated gadgets. The instructor then affirmed that he cannot teach any close-range fighter who cannot master these items. With that being said, the lesson started. Some found themselves entangled in the wires, making our hero think of how difficult it was to adapt for the first time. And yet in his previous life, he had full mastery over the gadgets. With that being said, he decided to test if he still had the required reflexes. Yet just as he was about to commence training, he noticed the teacher screaming at a contestant for being so weak despite being meant to be part of the future hunters of their country, before turning to another entangled in his own cable, stating that he wouldn't survive Division 3. Our hero had a hard time focusing with all the shouting around him. Just then he looked up to see his friends struggling to get the hang of it, which was perfectly expected seeing how no one had explained the right method to them. And so he asked the blonde one to come down as he was doing it all wrong, leaving the boy intrigued. After that, he landed on the ground. Dojin Kim called out his friend for not training despite the upcoming test, asked him to worry about himself as he was currently sure to fail. And so the boy asked his friend for the right way to proceed. The protagonist explained that in order to maintain balance, the swordsman must generate a rope of an adequate size and pour steady mana into it, before asking him to concentrate on his center of mass. As once in the air, the core will serve as the center of mass before summoning his own cable and throwing it on the wall. After focusing for a short while, the hero jumped into the air before gracefully landing. Christopher explained that this was the best way to land and to maneuver the body once airborne, and that one should keep a steady mana flow at all times. Dojin Kim began to recall the instruction of his friend before launching his anchor at the wall, focusing for a short moment before gracefully jumping into the air and successfully landing on his feet. This left the young one overjoyed, as he was certain that this showcased his great potential. But just then, the instructor began to yell at the both of them for chattering in the middle of his lecture. The man then pointed out how the two of them were deprived of determination before asking our hero for his name. Christopher introduced himself, having realized that the man was trying to correct their behavior. The angered instructor then pointed out how the young man's lack of practice must be a proof of his great talent, which he immediately confirms, thinking of how he could submit to the will of the teacher. Yet he was curious about the nature of the tests that they would be undergoing regarding aerial fighting. And since the hero was a reincarnation, he was naturally older than his instructor, which is why he decided to teach him a thing or two. With that being said, the man stated that the test would begin shortly before asking everyone to brace themselves. Later on, the name of our hero on the melee fighter list left someone intrigued. This matter was discussed by the three judges. Minsut Lee assumed that Arjo mistakenly assigned him to the wrong group, so she explained how the hero had a small idea about close-range weapons and how he was too prideful, which is why she placed him under Seonjin. This made her colleague realize that she planned on intimidating a newbie hunter by using a teacher found in the highest division. Arjo angrily affirmed that there was no turning back now and that there was no problem since one of the main purposes of the program is to teach the newbies, as according to her, it was vital to snap back to reality. Arrogant rookies like our hero. At the same time, the teacher explained how the test was to get back the air anchor position high on a pole. Before officially starting it, Seonjin then turned his gaze, stating that those who had slacked off should pass the test. Otherwise, they wouldn't be worthy of being called hunters. This amused Christopher, having realized that this test had the purpose of driving him out of the competition. The protagonist then asked the teacher about his reward if he managed to pass. So the Division 1 hunter declared that the protagonist shall do whatever he wants in his lessons if he manages to succeed. Seonjin was certain that our hero was sure to fail, stating how he had set the anchor at the height of 100 meters, making it impossible for an air anchor newbie or even intermediate to reach it in time. Upon seeing the students fail miserably, the teacher grew even more certain that his test was impossible to pass. Just then, he noticed a rising blade. Seonjin was fascinated to see the sword prodigy use his own levitating sword to fly. Despite the teacher's desire to see the talented one use the anchor, he speculated that he might just be able to pass the test. Just then, an impressed reaction caught his attention, leaving him impressed as well. This scenery left the teacher confused, as the hero was easily climbing to the top using the air anchor. Seonjin was baffled, as the young one didn't seem to be minding the heights. Yeah, just as everything was going smoothly, the hero's air boots suddenly malfunctioned. Just like that, the student began to fall, to his teacher's horror. Yet Christopher allowed a smile as he had resorted to his air anchor by swiftly grabbing the rope and pulling himself up in order to regain his footing. Just as he had stopped his fall, the hero began to rush to the top once again, aiming to reach the 100 meters. The protagonist then grabbed the anchor, leaving the instructor utterly baffled, as no one should be able to pass this test using gadgets he had never used before. Shortly after, Seongjin decided to resume his explanation, stating that as close-range fighters, they could either be initiators who start battles and immobilize opponents, meaning that they usually have skills for team fights and control, leaving our hero bored by this theoretical lesson after the physical lesson. Seongjin explained that they could also be melee fighters and engage after the initiators. As the hero basked in his liberty, the man continued explaining as the middle schooler began to think of how little authority he had over him, seeing how he had won their bet. The protagonist was easily able to pass such a test, seeing how he had great experience in the hunting world. That his main concern was the fact that a note suddenly appeared in his pocket. The anonymous sender, with mysterious intention, stated that he wanted to meet our hero in the backyard of the training center at 7 o'clock sharp, and so Christopher decided to check it for himself. After arriving at the meeting point, Christopher didn't see anyone waiting for him, which quickly made him assume that someone was just messing around. Just then, the hero noted something odd, as his all-seeing eye had picked up something strange, and just as he began to examine it, the entrance suddenly opened, uncovering a hidden staircase. Just like that, the protagonist made his way into the hidden area, when suddenly something caught his attention, as a figure stood in front of him, which was none other than the chairman of the Hunter Association, Juntaek Lee. The man smiled upon seeing that the young one had responded to his invite. Christopher quickly called him out, seeing how unclear his instructions were on the note, before assuming that it was a test of his intellect and asking the chairman for the reason behind his presence here. The old man explained how he had been eyeing the protagonist from the start of Hunters, the next generation, despite one episode being currently available. Yet the chairman had seen much more in the legendary player, as he had observed him during his workout and showcasing his movement speed and observational skills. The man became fascinated by the prodigy, and so he claimed that he tried to predict the winner of the competition, making Christopher immediately realize that he was pointing at him as the grand winner. According to the chairman, our hero was destined to enter the finest league and even surpass it. With that being said, the hero recalls how he was promised an interesting scenery in the note, which the chairman confirms. Just then, a secret room was opened, revealing S-rank weapons, as well as equipment for mans. Christopher was left confused as no apparent reason would explain why all of this was unveiled to him. The old man asked the young one if he desired them, which he obviously does, seeing how one of the present weapons was one that he had used in his first life. Caliburn, a greatsword that our hero was granted the right to use after a win. Once the weapon in question that felt amazing within his hand. The weapon even felt better upon being mutated into a firearm. Juntaek Lee explained that he could lend the weapons to the young man, or he could own them instead. So the old man explained how each of these weapons was far superior to anything the Moora's workshop could ever conceive. Christopher affirmed that in the end they were all but mere tools, before demanding that the chairman cut straight to the chase. This left the old one intrigued, seeing how most people would try to flatter him upon realizing his position. And yet the young man in front of him was trying to jump straight to business. This was something that had rarely occurred, and so the chairman invited the prodigy to join the Hunter Association, affirming that he would let him use any weapon of his choosing inside this room. The protagonist asked if there would be any benefits for him, making the chairman ask him if he was aware of what the Hunter Association offered its members, which he confirms, stating that he didn't have any use for it before declining the offer and heading towards the exit as the program was about to begin, leaving the old hunter shocked. The chairman affirmed that the protagonist was too overconfident, seeing how he had seen many talented individuals fail to access the first division. Yet the hero affirmed that he didn't want to know about it, as he only cared for himself. And so he bid the old one farewell before thanking him for showing him the S-class weapons. With that being said, the hero made his way to the surface, leaving the chairman alone, baffled by what just happened. Shortly after, the door of the classroom was opened. Dojin Kim rushed to check on his friend, stating that he was worried that he would be late. Christopher affirmed he was responsible enough, making his friend point out how he always made him anxious, like when he bet with the teacher. The protagonist explained how they wouldn't be banned for being late, seeing how it would greatly displease the audience. The blonde one asked the hero where he was, which he responded by stating that he was meeting with an old man, thinking that Christopher could have accepted the offer, that he was certain to achieve success without it due to the knowledge he had accumulated in his past life. Christopher was also sure to receive a tailor-made weapon from the Moora's workshop upon achieving victory, and so he decided to become more important before finally making his move. The legendary player happily began to think of how he could just form his own team in case of failure. Shortly after, the judges stated that they wished for the lessons to have been useful as the 3x3 fights were about to begin in the urban zone. It was also explained how the winning team would get to the next stage, while the losers would be kicked out of the show. Irajo was eager to see who would be the victors. Judges then explained that they would grant the winner the Mana Flow Stone for the next stage in order to make things more interesting. This greatly pleased our hero, seeing how the Mana Flow Stone enhances the quality of the mana, which is what he needed to use the Aether and the future skills to unlock. With that being said, the protagonist was more determined than ever to be victorious in the second stage. Min-Suk Lee explained how the fights would be live on TV and they were the real qualifiers, before reminding everyone that they are currently broadcast live. Ira Jo then explained that those who had the highest score in their classes would have the chance of drafting their team first. The judges then asked the contestants to wait in the waiting room and choose their teammates as the battles were soon to begin. With that, they were now off the air. After being relieved of the pressure of the cameras, Arjo began to think about how the protagonist had an amazing performance during the first stage and yet only showed arrogance, and how he didn't care about others despite having great skills. Thus, she judged a team battle to be the ultimate obstacle in his way. Min-Suk Lee quickly realized that his friend was thinking of the protagonist, leaving her baffled by how obvious she was. Min-Suk Lee pointed out how the 20 remaining weren't ready for team fights, especially aerial combat, and how she usually tests individual skills. With that, the lady revealed that she wanted the hero driven out of the competition, as regardless of his strength with aerial gear, a solitary wolf was doomed to become prey if he remains alone. Arajo then pointed out how the hero will struggle due to his low stats in a vast map that requires the hunters to quickly go through long distances. This made her colleague point out how obsessed she was with him, and so she revealed that she truly believes in his potential. Yet it was best for his own sake that he taste defeat. The third judge agreed with the first one, as an arrogant green hunter was certainly doomed, as even the finest player could lose it all in a careless second. And so the second one decided to speak his mind, stating that dooning pride and a victor's leading confidence in something as competitive as the Hunter Leagues were one and the same. Min-Suk Lee affirmed that he looked forward to the prodigy's performance in the team battle designed by his colleagues. Meanwhile, inside the waiting room, the protagonist was shocked to see that he got to choose first. A member of the staff confirmed, stating that this was due to him having the highest score. With that being said, our hero cracked a smile. Just like that, the gravity wielder found himself shocked, as he had been drafted into our hero's team. He assumed that the protagonist was mocking him, seeing how he had picked him as a teammate. Making it clear, he realized how egotistical this one was, as he still hadn't accepted the fact that he had been defeated by him. On the other hand, the gravity wielder didn't seem to complain, seeing how he already knew what the legendary player was capable of. At the end of the day, our hero could easily control him, seeing how he was but a teenager, before revealing that he wanted to win this round. Christopher then explained in a charming voice how he was in desperate need of their help, leaving the first bully speechless and the others on the brink of barfing. Even our hero felt disgusted by himself upon seeing the drastic measures he had to take in order to take the win. The telepath asked him if he had a plot in mind, which he confirms, stating that it was the only reason he paired up with them, before stating that they would obey him. Christopher decided to explain to the bullies the fate that awaited them if they defied him, yet decided to whisper it in order to not make their punishment public. Upon hearing what he had in store for them, the grabbing wielder was left utterly shocked and was left horrified, plunged into a state of panic. This greatly annoyed the protagonist, who couldn't reveal to him how he was in fact reliving his teenager days. And so he held soldiers and asked him to perfectly execute his commands. Christopher then affirmed in a menacing tone that their mistakes would only benefit the enemy and harm him, leaving both his teammates terrified. Shortly after began the second stage, where one would be eliminated if found handicapped or in contact with the ground, with the losing team being disqualified. Christopher was then teleported into the aerial arena and found himself eager to begin the fight. The protagonist quickly realized his position from the center and that he was all alone on the skyscraper, then decided to ask his teammates about their location, which they quickly unveiled. This saw the hero decide to immediately proceed with his plan. Christopher tasked them with reaching the center no matter what and fleeing any form of confrontation. The protagonist then summoned his gun, thinking of how low interaction players would have, seeing how vast the arena was for their numbers. This also meant that our hero needed to lure out the enemies himself, when suddenly another was fired, that our hero quickly evaded while his teammate asked him if he was in trouble, yet he affirmed to be having no problems. The protagonist knew very well that the archer that tried to ambush him was all alone, so he wasn't worthy after it came down. Before thinking of how he should reach the highest point at the center of the map, shortly after, as our hero reached the highest point, his teammates also gained their concealed positions, and Christopher asked them if they could spot him from where they were, which they affirmed, stating that he couldn't see them. With that being said, our hero decided to begin his master plan, and so he aimed his gun into the sky and fired a few loud shots into the air. With that, our hero only had to remain patient. Just then, the first challenger arrived, who friendly asked him about the reason behind his presence here. Our hero quickly recognized him as the friend of the sword prodigy. Han explained how excited he was at the opportunity to face our hero in a one-on-one battle before deciding to inform his teammate. Yet Han Yeol affirmed that he had heard everything from the open earpiece before asking him to deal with the gunner if he thinks himself able to. The sword prodigy then asked him to be careful until he arrives. This made the hero, who eavesdropped on the entire conversation, realize that he must be quick or else he will find himself facing an entire team alone. Han then asked the young man about the reason for him being alone, before stating that despite our hero being the first in melee class, he was certain to best him in a head-to-head fight, leaving our hero stunned, as this one ran his mouth more than he runs his blade. The hero claimed that he might be with his teammates, but Han quickly ditched the idea, seeing how he would have already been attacked if that was the case. With that being said, the swordsman charged at the marksman, stating that he will ask him about his fight with his rival at the end of the round. Christopher, who barely managed to block the sword, realized that he had underestimated the strength of his opponent, and so he decided to take a few steps back before creating a mana rope in order to flee the scene. Yet Han used the mana bit in order to follow him through the skies. The protagonist was amazed by his opponent's speed. Han kept on talking, leaving our hero shocked by how his mouth kept on running even in aerial pursuit. Just then, our hero pulled the rope in order to change his direction mid-air, leaving his opponent stunned as he had made his way behind him. Christopher tried to shoot the swordsman down, only for him to easily block the bullets. Upon seeing that this was a failure, the protagonist decided to resume his escape. Yet the inefficiency of the gun wasn't surprising, seeing how Han was one of the most talented contestants, especially when his replica of the artifact isn't as powerful as the original that he had on the first stage. Christopher's low mana reserves also presented themselves as a handicap. Just then, our hero noticed that the two of them weren't alone anymore. Hangil, who our hero stumbled upon, affirmed that he is surely going to defeat him. With that being said, the hero decided to reach out to his teammates. Jisoo was hiding in position, as well as Jin-sung. The protagonist asked his allies to prepare themselves, leaving his opponents startled. Just then, the hero gave them the signal to act, making his opponents stop mid-course. Upon seeing that nothing had happened, the academy students assumed that the protagonist was tricking them, and so the prodigy launched an attack that our hero quickly evaded, realizing that it was his signature skill. With that being said, came the turn of the gravity wielder to act, and just as Hangil assumed that it was another bluff, something odd happened. Just then, the young man realized. One initiated a gravitational strike. Just then, our hero's air width disappeared, leaving him to fall to his opponent's shock. And yet he didn't panic, but instead kept a confident smile on his face. This made his opponents assume that he was trying to make the three of them fall to their deaths. Just then, the airbags of the academy students suddenly stopped functioning, leaving them to fall along with our hero. Just then, telekinesis was activated, our hero in a web of mana, leaving Han and Hangil baffled as they kept on falling alone. The prodigy realized that he had been tricked. Just like that, the two members of Team A had been eliminated from the competition. With that, an air hook was launched into the air. Jisoo asked the team leader if his gravity was troublesome, yet the hero affirmed that it was acceptable before praising his other teammate as well. Jin-sung then claimed that their plan was passable, seeing how he didn't expect his skill to be able to shape itself into a net. This made the hero affirm that his strategy was flawless, as it would have been impossible to take down the academy students in head-on combat. The strategy consisted of using our hero as bait in order to lure the target into an aerial range of the gravity wielder, before the telepath stopped him from falling using his powers and leaving the other targets helpless. Christopher asked them to stay concentrated as the match was still going on, as according to him, the others might have grasped their plan, which could be somewhat inconvenient. Just then, from the messages of the system, the hero realized that the last member of Team A took down the entire Team B along with herself. As such, the winners were now clear, the first being the telepath, the second being the gravity wielder, and the last being the leader of Team C, which was none other than the genius player. Shortly after, in the waiting room, Han and Hangil were being scolded for losing to a single guy, while the scolder fought an entire team by herself. This left Hee-ju baffled by their poor performance. And so Han began to babble about the difference in stats and how they had lost, leaving our hero stunned by how much he was able to talk. One of the sword prodigies apologized, stating that he should have done better upon knowing the abilities of the enemy, making the hero call them out for his nature, as he always blamed himself when something wouldn't go as planned, making our hero think that the boy underestimated himself too much. But just then, the hero was approached by his teammates, who sincerely apologized for their past bad behavior, leaving our hero quite shocked. With that, the embarrassed Jin-sung decided to flee the scene. This pleased our hero, as he had uncovered an unexpected soft side of the bully. Meanwhile, Artijo was baffled by our hero's easy victory. The other two judges began to discuss how talented he was for defeating such a powerful team with sheer tactics, and seeing how the test wasn't meant to measure one's planning abilities, the lady was left blown away as well. Artijo then realized that it must have been a difficult task to come up with such a great plan despite knowing the powers of his allies that despised him so much, that she assumed that team leading was truly one of our hero's main factors. The commentator declared the end of round 1 and that Team C earned itself 5 points for its great performance before asking it to join him on stage, affirming that each one of them would be given a mana flowstone just as promised. With that, our hero was left relieved, as this item might allow him to sublime his full bloom skill. The commentator then explained how the stones would enhance their mana before asking them to use it to reach the pinnacle of Korea as well as the world, before stating that the losers of the qualifiers would have to take on a knockout round where the judges would kick them out based on their performances. Such a turning update surprised our hero, as this was a show, and upon looking at the list of the fallen participants, he was shocked to see that his friend was among them. The man then explained that in this secure area game mode, the contestants would have to team up with another. The goal of the game was for a team to occupy the designated zone for 60 seconds, yet this wasn't the only way for a team to win, as it could achieve victory by killing enough people, with the team who had slain the most contestants at the end of the match being automatically qualified. The man then added that the losers would be allowed to choose from the winners, who wouldn't be risking anything, to make the number of participants even. With that, the knockout round was stated to take place a day later. Meanwhile, in the waiting room, our hero realized that he had thought right, as the two strongest hunters had made an alliance in order to guarantee themselves victory, while his friends struggled to find a suitable teammate. According to Christopher, the talented Dojun Kim lacked the experience to be victorious in the knockout round. Just then, the blonde one spotted our hero and rushed to him, leaving him confused. Dojun Kim began to beg his schoolmate to be his partner, only for him to immediately refuse. This made the blonde one fiercely beg him, as upon teaching him the ways of the rapier, he practically became his tutor. Thus, he shouldn't abandon him. Our hero, who was left stunned by this logic, was unable to ignore Dojun Kim's puppy eyes, and so finally accepted to help him, seeing how he had nothing to lose, leaving him overjoyed. The protagonist also longed for an opportunity to test his newest reward. He then stated that his partner should obey him and that it would be the last time he would ever aid him. And just like that, a cheerful swordsman and an annoyed gunner became a team for the knockout round. Later that same night, Christopher was finally ready to use the Mana Flow Stone, an item that could be absorbed over time to greatly boost the mana within the body or consumed in order to refine the rank of a skill. The hero was pleased to see that the item functioned exactly as it did in his previous life. With that being said, he decided to throw it into his mouth before swallowing it. Just like that, All-Seeing Eye had been greatly upgraded, as well as the Arcane Transmutation and the Full Bloom that reached rank D+, which will boost the perks. The two talents that our hero had received from his achievement from Full Bloom had also been upgraded. Christopher was pleased to see that his stats were boosted and his main skills promoted. It was also relieving for him to know that his talents had also been sublimed. He speculated that his copy of the artifact could now match the original. With that being said, the pleased hero decided to go to sleep, as a big day awaited him tomorrow. Christopher knew very well that the next day would be far from boring. A round of applause was heard as the curtain lifted up. The protagonist began his journey upon marking himself from the post-awakeners of a team on the brink of ruin that he had joined. Just then, Coach Yoo Jung Kim offered to make our hero star by joining his team, in exchange for activating his Full Bloom in order to reach the needed level for the league. At first, the protagonist had his doubts, seeing how he wanted to let it evolve a little further. The coach decided to persuade our hero by letting him join the team, yet not partake in any match that elevated his Full Bloom, until he couldn't bear it anymore and accepted to awaken his Full Bloom. This greatly pleased the coach. And so, upon activating his Full Bloom, the hero began an impressive win streak that made him very well known. Yet seeing how his skill had been activated too soon, the protagonist suddenly lost his edge. Just then, Christopher woke up and tried to catch his breath after witnessing this spectacular nightmare. This was something that our hero desperately tried to suppress, as the situation wasn't like his first life. His Full Bloom was still dormant, and he had everything he needed to ensure himself a promising start. Christopher also knew very well that he had a long way to go, seeing how he could only defeat the strongest rookies of his generation by then. The protagonist wanted his Full Bloom to climb the ranks before awakening it, in order to reach a peak he never grasped before. Christopher was glad that the past was now over. Later that day in the waiting room, someone asked the blonde one if he was prepared. Dojun Kim affirmed to Christopher that he and his game's strategy were ready to go. Upon hearing this, the protagonist assumed that his friend had some kind of strategy, to which he revealed that his plan was just to follow his commands. The hero was baffled, seeing how he had overestimated this friend who wasn't the brightest light in the room. Later on, as the audience gathered, the knockout round in order to select the rest of the qualified contestants was about to begin. And so it started. With that, our hero began to teleport. The dungeon in question was urban, a map, with the capital zone being a tall skyscraper, which was the highest building. Our hero then spawned into the map, along with his ally, only to realize that this was the regular urban map. Dojun Kim asked the protagonist if he had a strategy in mind. He affirmed that they wouldn't be using kill points, but instead occupy this secure zone as fast as possible in order to achieve victory. This plan shocked the blonde one, as it was practically impossible with everyone against them, especially the team of Hangyeol and Haiju Yu. The hero affirmed that his friend could give up if he doesn't like his way of doing things, but the blonde one just suggested to review the plan. Christopher affirmed that there was no time as the cooldown was about to end, thus they needed to rush towards the secure zone, before stating that they were in a hurry as 10 seconds were left. With that, the air anchor was thrown, allowing our hero to quickly move within the city. And while his allies struggled to keep up, he began to think of how he was the best at choosing the aerial gadgets. Christopher decided to find himself a spot near the secure zone in order to keep his rivals from reaching it. Meanwhile, in another quarter of the city, Haiju Yu began to think about our hero, whose tactics have forced her to fight an entire team alone. Thus, it was his fault that she had to take the knockout round. And when asked what she was thinking about, she revealed that she was troubled by how easily her teammate lost to the protagonist, leaving the sword prodigy in a sense of guilt. Upon seeing this, the girl asked him to get himself together and said she wouldn't tolerate another failure. Hangyeol explained that Christopher should be taken seriously, so the lady explained that she didn't need a reminder and she had a strategy of her own. During the second stage, Hagju would have easily overpowered Team B alone if she hadn't tried to hide her true strength. Yet this time, she will fight at full power, as failure wasn't an option anymore. The girl stated that they will try to attack the young man at close range, seeing how he specialized in mid-range attacks. And despite disliking this plan, Hangyeol decided to agree and follow it. With that being said, the team of geniuses made their way to the battlefield. Meanwhile, our hero asked his friend if he was there yet, to which she responded by calling him out on his astonishing speed. Christopher stated that he had found himself a great hiding spot that he would use to keep the opponents at bay until they could enter the character's zone together. Dojun Kim expressed his doubts once again, as this would make them visible to all other teams, yet the hero affirmed that he had a strategy as he spotted two enemies, before asking his snow friend to keep a low profile and walk towards him instead of crossing the skies. With that being said, the hero aimed his gun and pulled the trigger. Just like that, the bullet had been launched, targeting the huntress and hitting her right in the head, to her companion's horror. Just like that, the first contestant was ejected from the knockout round. Our hero, who had aimed at a vital spot, realized that his firepower was equal to that of the first round. He even began to compare it to Ethan's abilities before realizing that it was better, as it even surpassed the potential of his past prime. Just as the other member of Team F tried to make his escape, our hero spotted him with his observational skill, before aiming his pistol and taking him out with a single shot. Dojun Kim, who was attracted by the noise, stated that the other teams had begun fighting, so the hero revealed that these were his gunshots, before giving his teammates strict directions toward his location. With that being said, the marksman was ready to earn himself some kill points. Meanwhile, the female judge was left frustrated, as she couldn't believe the scenery in front of her. Min-Suk Lee reminded them of his words, claiming the young man to be able to use firearms, and so Arajo theorized that this ability wasn't something that he already had, which didn't make sense to the others, seeing how they had witnessed Christopher using guns in the first audition. Yet then again, if that was the case, he wouldn't have searched for the Aether during the first trial in the first place. The lady even pointed out that the guns were much superior to the spotting period, where the hero only used his gun as a way to interrupt the enemy's flow. Just then, a man that the judges recognized as the chairman claimed that the prodigy must have achieved all the conditions to acquire this new power. The startled lady asked their superior about the reason behind his presence here. The judges tried to show their respect, yet their elder affirmed that it wasn't worth it for an old hunter like him, before stating that he only came here to observe with them a particular contestant. The relieved Min-Suk Lee asked the old man if he also wished to recruit the protagonist into his ranks. Yet to their surprise, the man denied it, stating that he had already been declined by the gunner. The chairman regretted not making him a more tempting offer. Even so, he decided to let it go and only focus on the upcoming events. The chairman then demanded to participate in the show, leaving the three judges startled. The old man was amused by their reactions and affirmed that he wasn't joking. With that being said, Min-Suk Lee had no choice but to agree to try to get the chairman into the game. Yet this also raised his suspicions, as he began to wonder about the true motives of the first-generation hunter. Meanwhile, as Dojun Kim arrived at the building, his friend quickly pointed him to his room, and so the young one entered the skyscraper, where his body of a teammate was hiding. With that being said, they were once again reunited. Everything was going as our hero had predicted it, seeing how no one still had tried to conquer the tower, while his friend assumed that everyone was lurking around too scared to be caught by the others mid-course. Dojun Kim demanded that the protagonist unveil his plan to him, yet the gunner explained how they only needed to worry about a single team, before turning to his teammate and asking him if he would rather fight the sword prodigy or the hammer genius. After taking some time to process what he had just heard, Dojun Kim was left horrified, assuming that his friend wanted him to take down the geniuses. Yet Christopher clarified that he only wanted him to distract them, and so he demanded to know what he would be doing in the meantime. The protagonist explained how he would conquer the capture zone. Dojun Kim was shocked by the simplicity of the strategy, to the point where he began to fear the worst, while his friend affirmed that they should get on their way. The blonde one asked the prodigy if he had truly thought things through, to which our hero replied by the use of a single smile. Later on, after walking for some time, the swordsman was still unable to fathom the absurd strategy he was partaking in, and so our heroes entered the tower, and upon opening the door, came face to face with their goal. After approaching it, the system informed all of the players that our heroes had conquered the capture zone, and that in case of any player trespassing, or if one of them exits it, the countdown will be reset. With that being said, the system stated that the countdown in question was 60 seconds long. Upon hearing this, the hero let out a wide smile, as he finally had the opportunity to enjoy himself. Upon seeing that the prodigy and his friends had occupied the tower, Keiju was left confused as she had assumed that the gunner would take out people from afar instead of going for the main goal. The sword prodigy speculated that the protagonist had found yet another artifact, though his allies said that it shouldn't be possible, as this arena wasn't the replica of a mystic place but a simple city, thus no hidden treasures could be found. Keiju asked Hangyeol, who had faced him before, about his opinion on the matter, as it seemed like their enemy was trying to bait everyone. The young man explained that the artifact was the only thing that allowed the hero to best him in the first stage, despite having quick thinking and great speed. According to the sword wielder, if it weren't for our hero's mobility, he wouldn't have lost the second stage by falling into his trap. Yet inside the capture zone, the movement of the protagonist would be somewhat restricted. Keiju then began to speculate that the young man didn't want to achieve the main goal but draw everyone to his location before suddenly disappearing. Just then, she finally realized. The lady claimed to have predicted the adversary's plan. Christopher, who had low stats and limited mobility in the capture zone, would only be left with one choice, which is to let the contestants drawn to him fight among themselves, while he safely lurks in the dark. The sword prodigy asked the hammer genius about her plan, so she explained how they needed to cause enough trouble to smoke him out, seeing how he didn't want to capture the zone in the first place. The lady was certain that her plan would grant them the win. When suddenly players had been eliminated, Team C, as well as a member of Team A, had been slain. Upon seeing this, Keiju was left baffled as it was too early for anyone to be eliminated. This made her realize that the timer should have been reset in the capture zone that became a battlefield due to the chaos created by the fleeing hero. Just then, her friend pointed her attention towards something. Only 20 seconds remained before the end of the knockout round, to the young one's shock. With that, the hammer genius was left clueless about the plot of our hero. A little earlier, the gunner waited patiently, while his friend doubted his plan that consisted of fighting all other contestants. Dojin Kim was well aware that he was currently a failsafe against anyone who passed the bullet of his mentor. The young man truly doubted the efficiency of this plan. Just then, the door was forcibly opened by a hunter that demanded a fair fight, only for him to be caught by surprise and quickly shot in the head. Just like that, a member of Team A was slain, leaving our hero's partner shocked. Just then, our heroes were startled by someone slashing himself an entrance, as a spearman emerged from the wall. Christopher tried to shoot him down, yet the spearman managed to evade the bullets by hiding behind a giant rock, making the hero realize that his firearms lacked the power to bypass walls. Upon looking at his opponents ready to fight, the hero was left without worries, as he got a swordsman with him. Just like that, Dojin Kim clashed blades with another contestant. Our hero then noticed the spearman's teammate trying to sneak up behind him, and so he resorted to his observational skill in order to perfectly locate his targets before simultaneously shooting them down. Just like that, Team C had been taken out. The hero decided to check the time, only to find that 30 seconds out of 60 had already passed. This might allow the swordsman and the gunner to win the round by achieving the main goal, yet this wasn't our hero's plan as he wanted complete destruction. Shortly after, the two geniuses arrived at the tower. Just then, the girl felt alerted upon seeing two mysterious figures in front of them, and so she alerted her comrade to pull out his weapons and prepare himself for the fight upon recognizing the one in front of them, as it was none other than our hero who aimed his firearms at them. The hero's bullet hit the pillar next to him, and so the protagonist fired once again, when suddenly he found himself in the range of the hammer genius and the sword prodigy. But just then, the pillar began to crack, ultimately startling the young man. All was going according to our hero's plan, as the tower began to collapse due to the broken pillar. Upon seeing how the capture zone was being destroyed, the hammer genius began to wonder about the next course of action. With that, less than 20 seconds remained until the end of the knockout round. Seeing how they were pressed by time, Keiju and Hangyeol decided to force their way to the goal. Just then, loud gunshots, followed by screams, were heard, which startled the young lady. Upon seeing that 3 contestants had been eliminated, she desperately began to wonder about a way to take down a firearm that was shooting from an unknown location. The pistol was aimed once again and fired, killing yet another hunter, leaving the girl unable to locate our hero. Due to the intense dust around her, as the building was left in shambles, our hero composed himself again, thinking of how he himself couldn't handle all of these numbers in a head-on fight, and so he resorted to his all-seeing skill in order to spot and successfully murder another contestant. This situation felt nostalgic to our hero, as in his previous life when his team was in a problematic situation, they desperately needed a savior in order to avoid the 9th place, while everyone doubted them. Yeah, that's where the idea came from. Back then, LTD was left to a single player standing against the fully functional RTX team. Christopher was more determined than ever to achieve victory in order to avoid 9th place, and so he aimed his rifle at the pillar and shot it down, just like what he recently did in his current life. The commentator assumed that our hero was trying to kill everyone in a suicide attack after losing all hope. But to the contrary, the young man was more determined than ever to win. This left everyone surprised, as in the crumbling building, where vision was greatly reduced, our hero managed to hit every shot. Christopher kept on firing loads of bullets using his rifle. In the blink of an eye, 3 members of RTX had been taken down. All were left amazed as our hero had already taken down 6 players, leaving only 1, thinking that they were about to witness a legendary clutched victory. Yet upon pressing the trigger, the hero, who now had a blade above his head, realized that he had emptied his mana reserves. Just like that, Christopher was slain by RTX as predicted by every odd, allowing them to conquer first place on the scoreboard while dropping LTD to rank 9. Shortly after, in the locker room, our hero felt empty as he was so close to victory. This one incident led to the great legendary player's downfall. Only this life around, our hero had the hammer genius at gunpoint. The girl desperately tried to evade, yet it was already too late. Just like that, our hero, who won't face any major problem anymore, managed to take down the team of geniuses. At the same time, the judges were left amazed, as the gunner managed to wipe out all other contestants, and in a match that pushes one to fight in the secure zone, our hero managed to claim victory by using the 2 distinct winning conditions at the same time. With that, Arajo had no choice but to admit that our hero possessed skills similar to a pro player. Min-Suk Lee was left quite pleased, as he was right about the young one all along, and so he reminded them how he recognized the young one's talent from the start, pointing out his mastery over firearms due to his amazing performance. His colleague admitted the young one's potential, yet still couldn't understand how he managed to hit all of his targets without seeing them. So Min-Suk Lee asked him if there was any ability that would lead him to use pistols since a very young age, before stating that accuracy was a key factor which the hero must use as a skill to enhance. According to the judge, the prodigy had enough faith in his own accuracy. Later on, as the remaining hunters were gathered in the stadium, the hero began to look at the pleased opinions on social media. Upon seeing how most comments were, the young man stated that he would have also enjoyed such a dominant battle if he was a spectator. Yet in reality, this wasn't the case, as our hero found himself struggling, seeing how he only managed to win by taking the contestants out with sneak attacks using a strategy he had already mastered. Just then, Full Bloom went from D to C after our hero managed to win the knockout round both ways. The pleased hero gained the talent Legendary Sniper that greatly increased his long-range precision, as well as guided shot that shaped the course of his attacks. Dojin Kim then called out our hero for hiding his true talents all along, praising him for his last performance and asking him to let him try his firearm. The blonde one stated that he should have enlightened him about his mana reserves that were enough to kill everyone, before asking him about his accuracy. Our hero claimed that he only followed his nature, which didn't satisfy the swordsman. Dojin Kim called out the genius for being moody enough to hide such secrets from his only friend. Upon hearing this, the hero realized that he hadn't talked to anyone except the swordsman ever since he was reincarnated, making him realize just how lonely he truly was. Just then, the 3 judges appeared on the stage. Arajo explained that not everyone could become a hunter, as the cruel reality was that it comes down to one's potential in the end. The judges affirmed that in this program, they only seek those who will one day become the finest hunters, which is why they had high expectations. The lady even stated that everyone present in this room still had their chance to shine, and that it wasn't time to rejoice, seeing how the true competition was about to start. And so she welcomed them to the Hunters League. Min-Suk Lee explained that their program was all about speed, which is why they had already profiled some young talents who would one day shine the brightest. Hearing this left our hero pleased with a sense of pride. The 3rd judge explained how for the final round, the contestants would have a normal hunter league match upon being arranged into 2 teams of 7. The teams would be created at random 7 days from now, with the MVP in first place, while the next best hunter would be crowned second. The judges then affirmed that they would be having an important individual partaking in the finals, which left our hero intrigued. That day, as our hero and the rest of the contestants made their way out of the stadium, he was suddenly called by someone, who was a recruiter for the LHR team, who was next to another man who introduced himself as the recruiter of PR team. Upon seeing the recruiters, our hero began to think of how he wanted to find a reliable team that would suit him. With that being said, Christopher proposed to the man to talk in private. Shortly after, when everything was settled, our hero found himself in front of 4 different recruiters, and affirmed that seeing how numerous they were, he wanted everyone in the room to immediately state their conditions. The first one presented himself as a coach from SMA Private Academy before stating that they could help him enter the big leagues, before revealing that the academy could send him to overseas leagues with a private tutor through international student exchange programs. But the coach was quickly left irritated as the boy affirmed that there were many others waiting their turn, which is why he needed to convince him with a few words. And so the coach affirmed that they would give him 200 million won each year, as well as a 100 million bonus. One of the other men decided to barge in, proposing an even higher bonus and a better salary that they couldn't accurately fix for now. Our hero couldn't help but feel that the second offer was tempting, that he needed to have the freedom of choosing his own team regardless of the money. This made him think that he was better off not signing up with any of them. The 3rd recruiter then proposed the same offer as the second one before stating that he shall give the hero anything he desires if he accepts. With that being said, Christopher asked the men if he would have the liberty to create a team of his own with any of them. Both recruiters were unable to answer, making our hero realize that this freedom was unattainable. With that being said, the photo crew there decided to end the meeting here before handing business cards to our hero, stating that they would try getting him his conditions. He was very well aware of how tempting those offers were for a beginner like him. But just then, he noticed that one recruiter remained in the room with him, while only 3 business cards were placed on the table. The protagonist asked the businessman if he had anything to discuss, and so he presented himself as a recruiter of a team named PER, who might be able to give him what he demands. The name of the team intrigued our hero, having realized that it was a weak team who played in the low leagues, seeing how he had never heard of it. The recruiter explained that despite not having signing bonuses like the other 3, he was willing to give our hero the authority to craft his own team. And when asked about the present players, he explained how most of the contracts were about to expire and that they were unsure of their will to continue. Thus, the team was ready for the player to choose the additional hunters that would join. Upon hearing this, the hero began to think of how, despite being a poor team, they were willing to give him the freedom that he desired. The hero pointed out how this offer meant that he could only choose a team of beginners, seeing how vague the man's words were. The recruiter panicked and proposed to arrange a meeting between the player and the president, who deeply desired the presence of the hero on his team. While the young man was taking some time to think, the recruiter affirmed that he would be glad if the young man would accept to meet his superior, so Christopher claimed that he would give it a thought. With that being said, the hero found himself alone in the room with 4 business cards. His choices were either to select a single teammate and enter the elite of Division 3 with a good pay, or assemble a team of newbies for the low leagues. Yet in the end, everything would come down to his performance. Upon exiting the door, someone came to check on him, which was none other than his friend, asking him if there were any promising offers made to him. When asked, Dojin Kim explained how he was waiting for our hero, seeing how he was staying at the academy anyway. The blonde one then asked his friend about the nature of the propositions that were made. So he explained how most of them proposed a fat salary along with a 300 million won bonus, which left the young man blown away. Christopher realized that his friend wouldn't earn that much in the academy, but it was a nest for training, while he would be entering Division 3 League. Dojin Kim asked his friend if he had opted for a team, to which he responded by stating that he hadn't made his decision yet. This intrigued the blonde one, as all offers were pretty generous. But intrigue was quickly replaced with surprise upon learning that his friend imposed a condition of drafting his own teammates. This sounded ridiculous, as despite being talented, the hero was only a newbie, which even Christopher couldn't deny. Christopher began to think that he was only getting what he had already earned. This made him wonder if he could get more out of the recruiters if he made them acknowledge him more. Upon seeing how the protagonist agreed with him, the swordsman assumed that he was going to drop the team drafting idea, yet the protagonist affirmed that this wasn't an option, before explaining how he just needed to prove himself more to the recruiters in order to achieve his goal. Meanwhile, the sword prodigy exited his own meeting room and was left exhausted, as the recruiters kept on making more and more offers despite him affirming that he was currently but a student. And just as the young man was about to complain, he received a notification. Intrigued, he looked at his phone, only to find it to be a text from the Hammer Genius, stating that he shouldn't have given the recruiters a proper meeting. Hangjiol was amazed by how well-timed this message was. The young man then began to wonder about the next destination of a certain individual, seeing how this person was no other than our hero, who was in fact the first ever Korean hunter sniper. The sword prodigy was still amazed by how the protagonist didn't miss a shot even with his vision blurred. Hangjiol affirmed that he would greatly be amused if he got the chance to meet our hero once again in Division 3 or even higher. The sword prodigy was excited about his next meeting with the gunner. Shortly after, Dojin Kim asked the protagonist if he had anything he wanted to repair, seeing how they were heading for the maintenance shop. This question intrigued our hero, seeing how they would take part in the Hunter League match, which is why they needed mana gadgets, yet the blonde one assumed the aerial equipment to be enough. The hero called out his friend for not truly observing the pro matches. As a great variety of mana gadgets existed, building the right one for the right foe could possibly grant one victory. Just then, the shopkeeper welcomed both of the middle schoolers and asked them if they had shot here before. The lady asked them if they were here for revising a gadget or fixing a weapon, before suggesting that they take a look at their new gadgets, as it was her first time in the shop. With that, our heroes found themselves in front of fancy items, which greatly impressed Dojin Kim. The boy seemed amazed by the items. The shopkeeper asked the young man if he needed help choosing his mana gadget, which he accepted. Seeing how the friend he pointed at was clueless when it came to mana gadgets, the shopkeeper explained how the air bits and the air anchor weren't the only gadgets in existence, as they came in 4 types: offense, defense, as well as mobility, leaving the blonde one intrigued as she had only stated 3 out of 4. So the shopkeeper explained how the 4th was the specialized gadgets category, where each item was distinguished as they had nothing in common. Explaining specialized gadgets to someone could prove challenging, as they were usually tailor-made, with each destined to a specific purpose. Dojin then asked him if he wanted specialized gadgets, which our hero denied, seeing how they are single-purpose while they needed multi-use. The lady confirmed, stating that specialized gadgets were used for a certain plan or to take on a certain player, while normal ones had many purposes. She then showcased the mana shield, which creates a protective barrier around its user. The blonde one realized that this defensive item wasn't as promising as it seemed, seeing how it wasn't popular in matches, making the lady explain how it's used as a last resort, possessing a cooldown between each shield. This made our hero call him out for being so ignorant about gadgets, so the young one affirmed that he had never come across them before. The hero explained how this gadget was used by marksmen, who were vulnerable to damage, unlike close-range fighters, in order to prepare for a counterattack. According to the protagonist, the newbie should understand what gadgets best befit each role and how they could be combined with the rest of the gear. Later on, the projectile was launched, before ultimately exploding. The protagonist explained that this was a mana bomber and asked the young man if this would help him. Dojin Kim claimed that these items must be paired with the projectiles of the marksman in order to add explosiveness to their attack. Our hero firmly affirmed that it wasn't the case, as something as big as a mana bomber couldn't be attached to his bullets, which made sense to the swordsman. Yet this made our hero think of how he could actually pull it off if he used the Aether, which can morph appearances. The swordsman then proposed the air dash to his friend, pointing out that it could help him with his key factor, which was movement in order to flee opponents. Christopher affirmed that this was an interesting way of thinking of it as he grabbed the item, before sneaking up behind his friend and pointing his gun at his skull. The protagonist affirmed that it would be more efficient to use it to sneak up on the enemy in order to forbid them from activating the mana shield. Dojin proposed to take all of the gadgets, yet our hero stated that their mana wasn't enough for this and that a certain number was allowed in a match. When asked about his final decision, the protagonist stated that he would take the air dash before asking his friend what he opted for. The boy explained how he still had made up his mind, as none of the gadgets they had seen so far were of any help to him. After thinking for a moment, the legendary player finally realized the right gadget for his friend, and so he reached out for it, before presenting it to his friend, who was left baffled. Shortly after, the finalists were gathered in the stadium, thanked them for responding to the summon before stating that the last stage would take place in 6 days. With that came the time to announce the arena of the finals as well as the selected teams. The name of the final arena was the Battleground of the Gods, a mountain forest filled with statues of divinities. Upon seeing that they would fight in an arena modeled after a tower dungeon, the hero was left excited, seeing how he knew the Battleground of the Gods very well, having fought in it several times in his past life. With that came the time to unveil the teams, with the first being the blue one. And so the list was unveiled, followed by the red team that our hero was part of and was quickly placed on screen. Arjo affirmed that she and the rest of the judges expected great teamwork, seeing how they had revealed to everyone their allies. And while the hero began to think of how ridiculous it was to build team bonds in 6 days, the judges affirmed that they had something to announce. Min-Sup Lee explained how the chairman would be participating in the match as an enemy of both teams, leaving all the finalists shocked, especially our hero. And so the projectors were turned to the man in question himself. The old man stated that he expected great things from the finalists and that his appearance was a token of appreciation. As fear filled the hearts of the rookies, the judges dismissed them, stating that they wished them all to have the chance to prove their worth on stage. After, someone approached the old man as he exited the stadium. The intrigued chairman turned around and asked the young one if there was anything he saw from him, as it was none other than the gunner prodigy. The hero stated that he wanted to return the PER business card to him, leaving the old man confused. So he explained how the recruiter asked him to meet his boss, which turned out to be the chairman. PER was one of the lowest teams in Division 3, and despite how normally our hero would forget about such a poor team, he recalled how in his past life it was unveiled that the chairman of the Hunter Association himself was the president of the team, which shocked everyone. This amused the old man, who quickly turned back to seriousness, ultimately startling our hero. The old one asked him about the reason he knew such a secret, seeing how Jung-Bin Lee was the official president of PER. So the hero claimed to be able to see it. According to Christopher, his shady response was perfect, as it would let the old man assume that he possessed a skill that allowed him to read his thoughts, making him wonder about his next course of action. The chairman found it amusing, as he didn't expect the existence of a skill that would uncover this kind of information. With that being said, the old man decided to truly introduce himself to the young one, as the president of PER as well as the chairman of the Hunter Association, before asking the hero if he wanted to accept either of his offers. Our hero was left speechless, as this was the moment he was waiting for. So he explained how he wanted to own PER in exchange for his enrollment. A little later, the recruiter asked his boss if Christopher gave him his business card, and she confirmed. According to the man, the condition proposed by the hero was too harsh, stating how he wasn't worth that much. The chairman began to think of how the first Korean sniper asked to control the team's management and business, which was a heavy price. He might have stood out at Hunters, the next generation, but in the end, the entire cast, including him, were all rookies. The chairman agreed with the recruiter, stating that the young man gave them a new offer, leaving him intrigued. So he explained how they made a bet on the match, and the hero claimed to be able to defeat both the chairman as well as the enemy team. which the shocked recruiter found stupid. But the old man, who would be holding back the entire time, claimed that the young man might be worth the price that he is demanding if he succeeds. Yet the man explained how all the odds were against him. The chairman then revealed that during his last conversation with our hero, he stated that if he manages to win the bet, he will be the one recruiting the chairman. And while the recruiter was blown away by such arrogance, the old one couldn't help but find it fascinating. Despite the doubts in his mind, the old man decided to give our hero a chance to prove himself. Meanwhile, the protagonist asked his teammates if they were opposed to him being captain, and despite expecting the sword prodigy to fight for the spot, he instead gazed at our hero with fascinated eyes, making him uncomfortable. Christopher decided to abort their strategy and explained how the strategy would be around him and Yahello, seeing how they were the two most competent players on the team. The young man then drew an image of the battlefield and explained how the blue team must be thinking the same as them, and since they are going to the battleground of the gods, the plan will be to farm first. Christopher also explained how the chairman's presence would force him and some others to follow another plan. So while at the start of the game their team starts to farm as much as possible, our hero, along with his friend and the sword prodigy, will go for the chairman and locate him. Upon hearing this, the young ones were left shocked. So the hero explained to them how his strategy included the old man's defeat, which Junsung found ridiculous, as the three of them wouldn't stand a chance against a chairman holding back. The telepath acknowledged how well the team captain had performed in the first and second stage, yet affirmed that this didn't make him the strongest player on a national scale, which is why he asked him to humble himself. And just as the protagonist began to think of how he didn't have time to deal with someone who still had a bone to pick with him, Yahello explained how everyone here knows about the chairman's power, including the captain, whom they should trust as he was a good leader in the show. This intrigued our hero, as the one who had been rivaling him the entire time was now defending him. Christopher decided to jump back to the subject and explain that they wouldn't be fighting the chairman head-on. With that, he asked the right team to listen to his plan, as they would find it logical. A burning desire for victory shined in our hero's eyes. Later, the lady judge settled the viewers before explaining the mechanics of the match. And so, upon spawning many holographic figures, she explained how the Hunter Leagues are played as 7 versus 7 matches, with certain details varying with the battleground. The first stage of the match is the farming stage, where one would have to level up by slaying monsters, followed by the mission stage, where both teams have to take down neutral monsters or certain areas. The last part being team fight, where the teams battle against each other. According to the judge, there were no two matches alike, seeing how missions depended on the map itself. Min-Suk Lee then explained how the chairman of the Hunter Association would be joining the battlefield, and with the role of the young students fully explained, now came the time to enlighten everyone on the chairman's function. So it was explained how the old man would be joining the match as a neutral monster. Yet this raised concerns, as Chairman Lee is one of the mightiest first-generation hunters, making it difficult for them to keep up with him. Arajo explained that for this reason, the stats of the old man would all be diminished by 2 points. Min-Suk Lee pointed out how important the slightest difference in stats was in the pro leagues, claiming that the students might stand a chance now. Arajo then explained how the first-generation hunter would have to face 2 teams of 7 alone, which would make it more exciting. And so Min-Suk Lee explained to the audience how everyone would be looking forward to this finale, where the best first-generation hunter faces talented newbies. With that being said, they were now off the air. The judge was approached by his colleague, asking him about his prediction regarding the winner of the match, expecting him to say the hero who he had been rooting for all along. But Min-Suk Lee claimed that the protagonist would surely lose the finale, before asking his friend if she knew why the chairman decided to join the match. Arajo speculated that the chairman wanted to test each contestant by himself in order to see who is more worthy of victory. Her friend confirmed before explaining that this would surely give the young genius a hard time, as his specialties, which are speed and sneak attack from long distances, would be powerless against the chairman. As he was a famously powerful melee fighter that can chase down his targets, it would be impossible for a marksman to deal with him unless they could defeat him in one attack. Yet the lady claimed that the power limit must reduce the gap between them, thus giving the young man a chance to prove himself. Min-Suk Lee explained that due to the system restraining his strength, the chairman himself would be going all out, before stating that everything was possible within a Hunter League match. The third judge stated that he mostly agreed with the second one, and that he believed in 3 sub-first chances, stating how the final map was the battleground of the gods. The countdown was about to end, and when it did, the reality visual started, as the comments began to rain down at an incredible rate, with most of them being about the first-generation hunter taking part in a middle school match. Meanwhile, the crowd in the stadium filled with cheers of excitement. The 3 judges were in place, as well as the young hunters. Christopher felt relieved that he knew the arena they were about to enter, which would allow his strategy to thrive. One of the judges headed towards the center of the podium and explained how in this final match at the battleground of the gods, the contestants would be following the rules, so the loser would be a wiped-out team. With that, the finals had started. In the past, dungeons labeled as towers mysteriously appeared all around the globe, creating international tensions among hunters. This led to the creation of the Hunter League. Conflict was inevitable due to the towers containing immensely powerful artifacts. Hunters had to fight each other as well as the monsters on the map, which led to the creation of the Hunter League. For this reason, a great number of arenas within the league are just copies of the existing towers. This also means that veteran hunters like the chairman had a much better knowledge of the map than the beginners do. Our hero finally arrived at the arena known as the Battleground of the Gods. Hangul asked the protagonist if they were truly going to proceed with his strategy, which he confirmed. And so he proposed that he and his two teammates go on their way. Our hero knew very well that backing down wasn't an option anymore. Meanwhile, in the stadium, the judges decided to take a look at the contestants. The blue team, along with the Hammer Genius on the front line, were wiping out the monsters, meaning that they were gathering strength before facing the chairman. The other judge confirmed it to be the best strategy, as the first-generation hunter, even with the imposed limit, was still far more powerful than the beginners. The judges then realized that, on the other hand, the red team sent 4 of its members farming by the 3, while the rest seemed to have something else in mind. It was noticed that the swordsman, the sword prodigy, as well as the gunner had gone off the normal path, leaving Min-Suk Lee shocked, as it seemed like they were going to the first-generation hunter. Arjo asked him for his opinion, so he revealed what he had in mind, which she found impossible, as the 3 of them, with their current stats, were inferior to the old man. Min-Suk Lee, who was of the same opinion, stated that they should spectate the rest of the plan. With that, our hero entered the neutral monster zone, where the chairman sat waiting with his halberd and shield. Just then, the man noticed something odd, as it seemed like some contestants were entering his domain. Upon seeing the one dashing towards him, the old man grew amused, wondering about this person's plan, having assumed that they were trying to sneak up on him. The first-generation hunter then realized that his opponents were currently hiding, when suddenly, a gunshot was fired, which the chairman blocked with ease using his shield. The hero kept on emptying the round, yet none of the bullets managed to hit the chairman. Seeing how easy this was for him, the old man asked the prodigy to make it harder, and so the protagonist began to shoot his bullets once again, as the chairman blocked them all with his shield while charging ahead. At that moment, Dojin Kim slowly snuck up behind the man and charged at him along with the sword prodigy's blades in order to take him by surprise. But the old man blocked the rapier as well as the levitating swords with great ease. Chairman Lee explained how the girl had let him down, and he had expected a great unexpected plot instead of a boring surprise attack. But just then, as a mysterious wind began to rise, the chairman felt intrigue upon recognizing what was coming. As a giant shadow approached the old man, he was left stunned, as he was now face to face with one of the statues of the arena that had seriously come to life. This dungeon was once the battlefield of a race of giants who mysteriously turned into statues and yet remained alive even as stone. The protagonist was very well aware of the secrets of this arena, seeing how in his previous life, pro matches were done inside real dungeons. Thus, he was aware of the right method to reanimate the statues. Back then, the blonde one was left stunned upon hearing of our hero's plan. But the sword prodigy assumed that the young man might have seen something that could help them, like back in the first stage. Christopher claimed that he was only following his instincts, leaving the swordsman intrigued. Dojin Kim assumed that our hero was just speculating when he stated that they should break the fractures accurately in order to awaken the giants. While on the other hand, Hangul excitedly claimed that our hero was just choosing one of his skills. Asked about the sleeping monsters being allies, the protagonist explained how the giants probably went crazy due to their long petrification, and that they will go berserk once unleashed. Dojin Kim expressed his fear that the giants won't attack the chairman, who poses as a neutral monster. Yet our hero responded that if his theory is right, they are surely to go after him, making the blonde one point out how they will also be targets. Yet to his shock, the hero explained that they had gadgets to resolve the situations. Back to the present, the chairman was left stunned by the monster in front of him. Just like that, the protagonist managed to unleash a giant monster in order to fight another. A crack was made on the statue's left shoulder, and 2 were made on its right thigh. The old man realized that the hero didn't plan on taking him down directly, as he was only distracting him, as his true plan was to awaken the sleeping giants, which he shouldn't know about until he enters the dungeon. This only left the chairman more confused, as it seemed like the hero made his plan around something that he shouldn't be aware of. Just then, the giant statue charged at the old man and tried to attack him using its giant attacks, but the chairman managed to block using his shield. The old man found himself worrying more about the 3 contestants who had suddenly disappeared than the monster in front of him. But just then, he realized that the rookies were using invisibility cloaks, a gadget that wasn't popular as it offered few ways to use it along with a small moment of concealment. Just then, the giant tried to attack the chairman with his axe once again, only for him to block it using his shield. Just then, our hero appeared from behind the wall, pointed his gun, and fired at the chairman, who realized that the young ones were planning on not letting him catch his breath. Even so, he allowed a smile, before unleashing a massive wave of energy that managed to stop the bullet mid-course. The old man began to laugh, seeing how the rookie managed to place his back against the wall, stating that it had been years since someone forced him into such a situation. The first-generation hunter praised the young man for his strategy, and yet affirmed that he hadn't been defeated yet, claiming that they were now on the same level and asking him to showcase all of his talents in their fight. Upon seeing this, the crowd in the stadium went wild with excitement. Min-Suk Lee was particularly shocked, Arajo explained that the bullets the neutral monster evaded were targeting the statues instead, aiming to reanimate them. Upon thinking of how the hero aimed for the fractures while pretending to be after the chairman, before turning invisible to make the old man the only target, Min-Suk Lee grew more and more amazed by the great potential of the prodigy. And so he began to watch the rest of the match with great interest, as the crowd was overjoyed by this great match. Meanwhile, the protagonist, realizing that the first-generation hunter lived up to his toughness, decided to put in some more effort in order to win. And so, while the chairman was taking care of the reanimated giant, the hero exited his hideout and fired his gun. Yet this time he was aiming at one of the sleeping statues, only for the chairman to use his incredible speed to block it just in time using his shield. Just like that, the old man spared himself another opponent, and after landing on the statue's head, before jumping once again in order to evade the axe of the monster, he explained, disappointed to our hero, how he already knew about this trick. Upon seeing this, Christopher had no choice but to resort to his all-seeing eye, and began to observe the old man's movements. And after taking some time to examine his shield, the protagonist decided to try something new by firing his gun once again, only for the first-generation hunter to evade once again by making it bounce off his shield before pointing out how useless this trick was. Yet the main bullet kept on its course. Just then, the first bullet was hit by another. The chairman felt alerted upon realizing that each bullet went in a different direction upon bouncing off each other. This trick allowed our hero to fracture yet another statue. Just like that, two of the sleeping giants were now active. The first-generation hunter was now in a tough situation. Christopher knew very well that even someone as strong as the chairman would surely struggle in this situation, and so he decided to contact his two teammates, stating that the rest of the team would arrive shortly before asking them if they remembered their instructions, which they both confirmed. Meanwhile, a little further, the rest of the team took down a pack of wolves. Jun-sung, who was relieved at the monster's death, wasn't sure of what the team leader's intentions were, yet he agreed to help him, seeing how he stated that out of the four of them, he was the most trustworthy. The team leader asked them first to farm without losing anyone, secondly to lure out the blue team, and lastly to immediately flee upon contact with the enemy. The telepath was particularly impressed as even an escape plan was made. Just then, the young man realized that the blue team had arrived, searching for them. And yet, it was just as the hero had expected. Haeju Yu, once determined to win this final, the telepath then ordered the rest of the team to escape as fast as possible. Yet upon doing so, the members of the red team were noticed by the blue ones. The hammer genius urged her teammates to chase the opponent. Jun-sung began to recall how they were tasked with making the enemy team chase them according to our hero's instruction. Yet upon being chased down by the victory-obsessed hammer genius, he began to have his doubts regarding this plan. The young man then turned to his teammate, asking him to run in a straight line as two bullets came flying by them. Haeju Yu kept on running, until she finally stopped upon noticing another statue of the giant had been hit in the head as well as the shoulder. As the monster began to wake up, the girl realized that she was now in the domain of the neutral monster. Fragments of the statue began to fall on the ground. The awakened giant let out a fierce roar. The girl did her best to dodge their incoming attack in time. This also left the telepath intrigued, as the protagonist was supposed to be fighting the chairman, which only left him more confused while the old man was taking on two giants alone. The protagonist asked his friend to prolong the chaos, yet he affirmed that he couldn't buy in a lot of time, and so Christopher demanded 3 minutes. Jun-sung asked what plan he had in mind, yet he gave him no apparent answer. The legendary player then explained to the sword prodigy and to the blonde one that they needed to act quickly while they were still invisible, and that they would wipe out the red team on his signal. And so he began to count down, as each of his friends stood ready, and just as the signal was given, his two friends ditched the invisibility cloaks and charged right ahead, targeting the hammer genius and the rest of her team. Haeju Yu quickly realized that she was now in a tough situation, and so she tasked her team with focusing on the main opponent in this free-for-all fight and avoiding the boulders and the awakened statues. Just then, the skill was activated. The healing genius used a healing spell named Sanctuary on her team. That displeased the hero, who decided to act quickly, and so he shot a bullet and aimed it at the girl, when suddenly it was blocked by a gadget. Haeju Yu affirmed that she had taken her precautions in order to fight our hero. With that, the protagonist realized that he didn't do her abilities justice. Thus, he now had to resort to his backup plan, and so the hero took out one of the 8 pieces constituting the mana bomber and reshaped it into a bullet before imbuing it with his artificial artifact. This new type of bullet had more mass than the average one, and so our hero aimed the gun and shot the girl with what seemed to be a powerful blast of energy. It was so powerful that it was able to break down the shield of the skill Sanctuary, as well as almost knock the girl out of the magic circle. Upon seeing this, his teammates were also left amazed, as this was something they had never seen before. The hero himself was amazed by the fact that he succeeded in creating a mana bomber bullet. Meanwhile, the hammer genius found herself injured. Her healing skill allowed her wounds to close much faster, yet she was quite annoyed, as she suddenly found herself evading the slash of a levitating sword while thinking of how she had to take down the rest of the red team. With that being said, the girl prepared herself. In the Hunter League, one only had 2 solutions in order to gain power, with the first being farming the spawning monsters, and the other being killing the enemy players. But just as the girl charged up ahead, she found herself getting shot in the back. This made the hero think of how the red team was almost wiped out. Meanwhile, the chairman had slain a giant by cutting it in half. It seemed like the injured chairman had successfully slain the two statues. The old man found himself pleased, seeing how he previously longed for such a fight. With that being said, he went off to resume his conversation with the young man, who affirmed that they didn't have much to talk about. The chairman expressed how he was impressed by the hero's tactical minds, seeing how the current Hunter Lee mostly focused on sheer strength. The chairman, who focused his energy, explained that back in his time when hunters had to fight in towers, strategy had always been an important factor. Just then, the man stopped walking and suddenly threw his weapon at someone who dodged at the last second. This left our hero baffled, as despite the invisibility, the man must have used his voice in order to locate him. Assuming that the old one must be fatigued, he was now certain that he and his team could beat him. With that being said, Dojin Kim charged at the man with incredible speed, only for him to easily parry his attack, before eliminating him with one stab. The chairman then managed to block the speeding bullet as well as the flying swords using his shield. And while Hangyeol was left annoyed, Hero began to think of how wide the difference was between rookies like them and a first-generation hunter, as despite working as hard as possible, like the telepath who got stabbed by the overwhelming chairman, they looked like the only remaining members of Team Red were the gunner and the sword prodigy. The old man asked the young one if this turn of events was unexpected. Yet to Hangyeol's shock, the protagonist affirmed that he had already predicted it all. This made the chairman look forward to our hero's strategy in order to take him down. With that being said, the gunner gave the signal to the sword prodigy, who focused all of his power into his blades, before launching them at high speed, yet the chairman remained unfazed, as he easily blocked the blade with his shield. The old man then charged at the rookies and eliminated Hangyeol. With that, the gunner was the only player left in the match. Now alone in face of a first-generation hunter, our hero began to sweat bullets. The protagonist was now about to confront the neutral monster on his own. This made him think of how the old man was a tank, which was a predator to more expensive types like him, putting our hero out of spot, and so Chairman Lee charged right ahead, claiming that he was the winner, before stabbing our hero in the chest. Yet Christopher let out a smile, before pulling out a mana bomber, and so a great explosion occurred. Everyone in the crowd silently waited for the result of the match to be unveiled from behind the dust. Arajo was on the edge of her seat as well. As the dust began to dissipate, it was revealed that both the young man and the old man were lying down on the ground. Min-Sut Lee was shocked. As the protagonist earned his team victory, the judge was unable to fathom the incredible achievement that the young one had accomplished, as he had taken out the chairman along with him using a mana bomber, making him realize that the most dangerous person in the match wasn't the chairman, but the genius sniper. Later on, our hero stepped on the podium, released. Yet he was still disappointed, as if he had managed to evade the spear and launch the bomb, he would have defeated the chairman. Upon seeing how gloomy he looked, his friend asked him to cheer up, yet the boy affirmed that he had no reason, seeing how he couldn't defeat the old man. This intrigued the sword prodigy, as it meant that the protagonist hadn't heard the news. And when Christopher and Dojin Kim turned to ask him about it, he claimed that it was nothing important, leaving the both of them intrigued. The chairman then set foot on the stage. All showed their respect by keeping silent. The old man then turned to the genius hunter. Arajo explained how every one of the 100,000 awakeners worldwide that awakens each year thinks at least once of becoming hunters. Yet this wasn't an easy goal, as despite being athletes, unlike their beast counterparts who were warriors, a hunter must embody great noble qualities, and that only those who possessed all of these qualities could one day become hunters. She then claimed that one of their contestants had proven himself to embody all of these qualities, as he was the winner of the competition. All eagerly awaited the result, and it turned out to be the protagonist, who was stated to have proven himself as the greatest contestant of hunters, the next generation. All began to cheer for him as he headed towards the trophy. This made Christopher feel odd, as the judge handed him this trophy. Despite having won countless matches in his first life, a sense of joy that had been missing for a while suddenly filled his heart. By winning the competition, Hiro finally earned his mother's approval to pursue his hunting dream. The lady then stated that her husband was left overjoyed by each of the accomplishments his child had done, and even began to brag to his friends about him. Christopher began to think of how he didn't have to make his parents worried by participating in the low leagues like he did in his first life. With that, only one matter was now left at hand. Our hero took a seat and grabbed his cup of tea, as the chairman asked him about the reason behind his sudden visit, making the hero think of how tricky the veteran hunter was. Christopher informed him that seeing how he won his bet, he was here to collect the team that he was promised. Yet the old man pointed out how he didn't quite defeat him, as our hero had used the giants to exhaust him before taking himself down with him. Upon hearing this, the young man decided to exit the office, startling the old man, who quickly grabbed his hand and explained that he was only messing with him, before stating that they would be working together from now on. With that being said, the old man decided to gift his team to the teenager in front of him due to his astonishing performance. After thinking for a while, he reached out his hand to the old man, affirming that he would be happy to work with him. The chairman, who was blown away by this adult-like gesture, reached out his hand in agreement, thus sealing the deal. Later on, in front of the urban transit entrance, the hero began to think of how the Moora's shop was a new worldwide name for its refined weapons and understanding of the hunter's needs. Christopher came here in order to demand the tailor-made weapon that he was promised, which didn't explain the presence of Dojun Kim, who stated that he wanted a made weapon as well, as he was about to enter the Hunter League, which made sense. The hero was also left intrigued by the fact that Min-suk Lee would be the one helping him during his visit at Moora's shop. Dojun Kim asked Mr. Lee the difference between a normal weapon and a tailor-made one, so the man asked him to drop the formalities, before explaining how a tailor-made weapon would be more suited for the hunter and his fighting style, as it was an image of him. Our hero then lifted his head, thinking of how long it had been since he set foot in this workshop. Upon entering the building, the three of them were noticed by the receptionist. The lady quickly greeted the one she had recognized as Min-suk Lee, who asked her if they could enter. So the receptionist told them that they would await them at section B3. This made the hero think of how this shop was divided into sections A, B, C, and D, with A giving the best quality and D the cheapest. Our hero was pleased to see that his weapon would be manufactured in section B. The gunner, along with the other two, arrived at the high-tech laboratory. Upon seeing the research being made, Dojun Kim was left impressed. Min-suk Lee then pointed out how the teenagers had never entered a workshop before. The blonde one affirmed that this was the case and that he was very excited, before bombarding the old judge with questions while his friend remained silent. The hunter affirmed that he would respond to his questions later, as he would now teach them about the basic stuff. When a tailor-made weapon is crafted, one must first choose a regular one as the base model, just like him with his 7-branched sword. Min-suk Lee showed them the base model of his custom weapon, which was a regular sword. Dojun Kim was once again left amazed by how they would imbue the normal weapons with certain features in order to make them more suitable for the user, before stating that his modifications were 6 additional blades that branched out of his main sword as he began to draw. The man then began to add more detail on the board, before explaining how his weapon used the branch-style blades in order to widen the wounds upon being pulled out from the targets. He then gave his supposed blueprint to the lady, asking her to replicate the weapon. With that, the machine had been activated. Just like that, the blade that the man had originally drawn came to life. Dojun Kim was once again amazed upon seeing how such a detailed weapon was made from a poor drawing. Min-suk Lee explained that it was only natural, as they only explained their demands while the workshop engineered the weapons itself, before stating that the most important part was knowing what kind of weapon they needed and the way to use it. This made the blonde one think carefully of the kind of weapon that he wanted, but the protagonist decided to order the same weapon that he possessed in his past life. Yet his curiosity was piqued by the kind of weapon that his friend would demand. Just then, the blonde one had an idea, and so he grabbed a rapier, which intrigued the hero, as this was a weapon for thrusting. Dojun Kim then began to write what he needed. The young one wanted his weapon to enhance his speed, as well as for the rapier to glow when the first effect is activated, leaving our hero shocked. This amused Min-suk Lee, who explained how many great players valued aesthetics as well, before turning to the winner of the competition and asking him what he wanted. And so Christopher decided to unveil his choice. Thinking of how guns weren't used in his homeland, there was no base model. It's seeing how he could shape the weapon itself with his arcane weapon transmutation. This shouldn't be a problem. And so the protagonist reached out to grab something, before demanding permission to use the ingot that he had in hand. Min-suk Lee obviously agreed, stating that it was his right as the winner. With that being said, our hero began to reshape the raw material, using his arcane weapon transmutation skill in order to give it a new form. Just like that, our hero had acquired a rifle, leaving everyone amazed. Seeing how he easily crafted such a complex weapon, the protagonist could never get used to the admiring looks that he received so much in his past life. The Moora's workshop possessed a branch in every part of the world where Hunter's League was present. These branches were always rivaling each other, and they were always assessed based on 2 criteria. The first being the refinement of the weapons they created, as well as its wielder. The branch of the Moora's workshop in our hero's home country possessed a bad reputation, to the point where they were bad-mouthed on the internet along with their weapons, seeing how weak their wielders are. Yet our hero was different, as he could break the curse of the Korean branch. As aside from winning the competition, he managed to create an entirely new weapon with no base model. The lady was determined to grab this opportunity. She then thanked the hero for agreeing to meet her, before presenting herself as Hyona Park, the one in charge of the Korean branch of the Moora's workshop, and cutting straight to the chase. She asked our hero if he was fond of the weapon he had obtained in selection. So he explained how he was forced to choose from this section, seeing how it was promised for the winner of the show. Hyona Park then explained that she had something interesting for our hero if he was only after a mana ingot, and so she presented him with a shiny metal filled with mana, leaving him quite shocked. The head of the branch claimed that she would give the hero this ingot for free, leaving him interested by the offer. The lady then stated that she wanted the hero to use this ingot in order to create his weapon and earn fame with it if possible. But she expected him to work alongside their workshop in order to use his arcane transmutation to create new weapons, which was a tempting offer. The hero agreed that such a proposal was tempting, and yet demanded to sign all the weapons that he would be designing. Upon hearing this, the lady was left baffled, as it seemed like the young man saw through her scheme, as if he knew that if he used this ingot to craft his own weapon, the public would believe that it was their company that had created it. Hyona Park also planned to make our hero craft more weapons in order to release a collection crafted with A+ ingots. And so she informed our hero that he would have to sign a contract and work without revealing his name to the public. To which the hero responded by stating that he would offer his skills to the main branch of the Moora's workshop, which greatly annoyed the lady, who asked him about his terms. This pleased our hero, as he finally had the opportunity to impose his conditions, and so he demanded a sponsorship, which the lady found weird, seeing how their branch was already giving him a weapon. But in the end, she accepted to give him the sponsorships that he desired, so he decided to clarify that the Korean branch would be sponsoring a team that he would join known as PR. This greatly annoyed Hyona Park, as she was being forced into sponsoring one of the weakest Division 3 teams. So she suggested that our hero choose another team to join that would be more suitable for this sponsorship. Christopher explained that this would be impossible, seeing how he had already signed the contract. Upon hearing this, the lady was left baffled, and so she explained how sponsoring such a team wouldn't benefit their sales or image, which our hero only found to be fair, seeing how he would be making the weapons for the Korean branch only. After taking some time to think, the head of the Korean branch finally accepted to send someone to PR for the sponsorship details. Just like that, our hero forced the head of the Korean branch of a distinguished company into an impossible deal. Later that day, our hero arrived at the stadium, and upon looking at the few people filling the seats, recalled how this was a crowd big enough to suit a Division 3 league match. The occurring match opposed the team of ESP and PR. Christopher assumed that PDR could win, as it was the last place versus rank 9. The commentator then began to explain how PDR couldn't afford to lose against ESP, thus they needed to turn the tables. As the lights were turned on, the hero began to think of how Division 2 and 3 matches usually happen in virtual reality, unlike Division 1. That takes place inside real-life dungeons, making any case of injury something serious. If the lower divisions were spared from such worries, and yet, to our hero's shock, the players seemed terrified and running for their lives. After witnessing the match, the hero was left baffled, as the performance he had just witnessed was very much pathetic. The disappointed Christopher only came here in order to spot those with potential within PER, and yet they had lost the match. The protagonist was particularly blown away upon hearing that PER only tasted defeat all along the season, and so he turned his gaze to look at the scoreboard that confirmed it. With that, the hero began to regret his choice in enrolling in such a team, thinking that he would have been better choosing a team with good players that he could make enter Division 1 later on. Yet after taking a breath to gather his thoughts, he quickly ditched the idea. The protagonist was determined to see it through to the end by somehow finding a solution. But first things first, our hero needed to fire as many players as possible and pray for at least one awakener with potential. Later on, the hero was left baffled, as the residence of the team was a regular house. But then he recalled his first team lacked a sponsorship, which is why they used normal houses as well. He decided to give it a chance, and seeing how he was given the code earlier, he quickly entered it, allowing him to enter the building only to be welcomed by a dispute regarding the team's most recent loss. Players were blaming each other, while the official president tried to calm them down. The hero realized that arguments were natural, seeing how poorly the team was doing. Just then, the coach noticed that the young man had arrived, and so introduced him to the rest of the team as the new recruit who won Hunters, the next generation. Upon hearing this, all members were left baffled. The hero then praised the team for its performance, as it was utterly miserable, leaving them all shocked. One of the players was greatly angered by this provocation, and affirmed to the young one that he should show some respect, as they were all pro players. But the hero decided to double down before mocking the man for getting offended. The genius proposed to have a fight with a pro player, where the loser had to lead the team, before provoking the hot-headed player once again. Later on, inside the training room, the hero began to think of how he entered the team and treated its members' weaknesses, and yet only 3 hunters responded to his provocations, meaning that the rest of the team lacked the determination to stand up to him. The hero then asked them not to deactivate their pain receptors after claiming that today he would defeat them, as he wanted everyone to fight at full strength. Yet the hot-headed hunter affirmed that he shouldn't focus on them, but rather on himself. Our hero recognized him as the one who was late in the match after engaging the enemy alone. His name was Gilhan Lee, who hopefully uses a B+ skill named Destructive Charge that creates a shockwave upon impact. The hero also realized that this one hadn't been training well, seeing how the rookies on the show possessed more impressive stats than him, as according to him, he was wasting the potential of his good skill, making it hard to fathom how he and the rest of the team succeeded in becoming pro hunters. With that, the hero let out an exhausted sigh. Our hero had now entered the virtual battlefield. Suddenly, our hero heard explosion sounds. Everything was going just as he had predicted it, as Gilhan Lee was using his skill Destructive Charge in order to launch himself at him, only for the hero to quickly evade him. Yet the pro player smiled, before charging into the building to the hero's shock. Just then, he noticed the ground misbehaving under his feet. This left the protagonist alerted, and so he jumped into the air in order to avoid the shockwave that had a much bigger length than expected, making him realize how great the skill was. Christopher wanted the man to believe that he had fallen for his trick. The man then launched himself at the gunner, thinking that this would be an easy victory. Yet in reality, he was only dancing in our hero's palm, and so Christopher resorted to his air anchor in order to gain some altitude, leaving the pro hunter in a tough situation as he pointed his rifle at him. And with a single shot, all were left amazed at the result of the fight. The heroes stood on top of the building with their friend tied up, asking them who wanted to fight him first, before affirming that he would plunge them into great pain, leaving the both of them terrified as he let out his gunshots. Back to the real world, the defeated hunters found themselves in great agony, and so they recalled how they all made a bet stating that the loser must leave PR, which they didn't agree to. Yet our hero didn't care as he asked them to get out. Upon seeing this, the both of them immediately exited the room, stating that this team would never amount to anything. Yet the angry Gilhan Lee remained hesitating. Our hero approached him, trying to kick him out once again. But just then, the pro hunter bit his lip and made it bleed as he apologized to our hero, which greatly intrigued our hero. Gilhan Lee affirmed that the mistake was his before begging the prodigy to let him in again. Christopher acknowledged the man's fighting spirit and asked him to give him a reason why he should stay on the team after losing to a beginner like him. The frustrated player explained that his destructive charge was a great skill, and despite it being his only good point, he assumed that this would be sufficient as a reason. Christopher couldn't deny how useful destructive charge truly was, and so he called him out for having a great skill and yet failing to use it properly, before pointing out how he once gave him an ear for advice. But the pro hero firmly affirmed that he would do everything the hero says if he allows him to stay on the team. With that, Christopher affirmed to Gilhan Lee that he was forbidden from answering to anybody but him, before asking him if he truly meant what he said. The hot-headed player confirmed. The protagonist was unsure of his decision, yet seeing how all the team was bare bones and how they didn't have the money for recruitment, he decided to use the hot-headed player as a way to discipline the others. Later on, while in his room, the hero began to think of how he needed to replace the 2 players he had fired from the team. Christopher tried to recruit Hyeju Yu, yet she immediately declined and angrily affirmed that she would never join him. This left our hero disappointed as the hammer genius possessed great talent. Just then, he was contacted by someone, leaving him amazed. Christopher was amazed to see the sword prodigy, who had heard about the recruitment from Hyeju Yu, being the one to initiate conversation. Han Yeol was the best player of Teen, one of the capital's private academy, which was a surprise for the protagonist to see him trying to join PER. Yet then again, our hero began to think that his great performance surely had impressed him, and upon confirming that he was interested in joining the team, he asked him about LHR and the academy, to which he stated that he needed to talk to them. This conversation filled our hero with joy, seeing how fruitful it was to show an astonishing performance at Hunter, the next generation. The sword of the prodigy would be a great asset to the team. Just then, our hero received another notification, leaving him baffled, as someone else was trying to join the team, someone rather impressive. Upon looking at the files and statistics of the team, the hero was left in a tough spot, as the most crucial element in team fighting is synchronization among skills, which is something absent from PR. On top of not having any synchronization at all, each of the members' stats were very low. Just then, our hero noticed something. The girl named Yeonju Lee possessed a skill named Potential Awareness that allowed her to quickly triangulate the location of the target. This skill impressed our hero, as if combined with the sword prodigy, as well as the 2 hunters that contacted him last night. PER could have the potential to dominate the Division 3 leagues. Later on, at the chairman's office, the man asked the hero about his opinion regarding PER, and if he appreciated their talents, and sarcastically affirmed that each of them had immense potential due to the chairman's hard work, making Jumtaek Lee explain how he didn't find the time to be a great manager. The old man then pointed out how the hero was recruiting and how shocked he was to see him earn them the sponsorship of the Moora's workshop. The chairman then asked the hero about the nature of the team that he wished to create. He explained how he had 2 concepts in mind, with the first being what the chairman must have predicted, where the team only relies on him. The chairman pointed out how this would be greatly expected, before pointing out how a team that only uses one strategy is bound to fail, which is why our hero came up with another idea, which was still a work in progress, and yet affirmed to the president that it would be an explosive strategy once completed. Hearing this greatly shocked the old man, who decided to let the young one handle the situation. With that, the chairman decided to get straight to the point, as he presented the protagonist with the necessary documents that made him the true president of PR. Yet just as our hero was about to make his leave, he informed him that the team had played its last seasonal match and that there was a press conference tomorrow, and that our hero should participate as the representative of PR, seeing how he was its new president. After giving it a small thought, the hero agreed to attend as he had an ulterior motive. The next day at the press conference, our hero found himself bored. After presenting himself as the new president of the team PR, who would also pose as a player, no one wanted to ask him questions. The man then decided to ask the president of LTD who finished first this season due to great teamwork, his opinion regarding his player ascending to Division 2. So the LTE president explained how this was a good question and how they would be replaced by players of a similar level, before affirming that they plan on recruiting several awakeners that are considered to be the future best. He tried to guess who the man was referring to by stating future best, but just then he realized that this man was in fact a familiar figure, as it was none other than Director Lee. This man, as the future coach of Division 1 LTT, was the one who forced our hero to activate his full bloom early and was currently a coach in the low leagues. This man was none other than Hyun Lee. According to the host of the show, LHR was rumored to be training a hunter, and so he asked the coach if this young man would be seen next season. Yet the coach explained that they couldn't give a final answer currently. Our hero realized that the sword prodigy was supposed to enter this team. The man then turned to PR, stating that it got a new president. With that being said, the protagonist presented himself as the new president of PR. The host explained how our hero was the first middle schooler to act as a player and as a president at the same time, before asking him if he would change PR, stating that despite the team losing all of its matches this season, he promised them great changes. The interviewer asked our hero to unveil some of these modifications. The protagonist explained how they would be replacing some players while he acts as a coach and player at the same time. And just as he was about to talk about their sponsor, he was quickly cut off by the host, who decided to pass on to the next person, completely ignoring the young man, while firm that he wasn't done talking yet. The annoyed interviewer had no choice but to let the protagonist speak, and so Christopher explained that after watching many matches in Division 3, none of the teams were actually competent. This threw the studio into a cold silence. Director Lee was greatly angered by this claim, then asked the coaches to be ready as he and his team are coming to defeat them, before pointing to the director, affirming that they are sure to take his team down, as it would be a scandal for the top team to be defeated by the weakest one on the board. With that, he stopped his provocations, as he had surely distinguished himself in various fields. The doors opened. Christopher was glad to see them finally arrive, as Jisoo and Dojun Kim, along with Hang Yeol, were at his doorstep. Upon entering, the blonde one pointed out how the team's headquarters was a simple house. Yet as our hero explained to him how the team couldn't afford more, he began to think of how predictable it was of Dojun Kim to contact him first. Yet this move was surprising coming from the telepath on the other hand. Jisoo then noticed the protagonist looking at him, so he asked him if there was anything wrong. But the pleased hero affirmed with a big smile that everything was fine, after taking a good look at the dormitory of the team. Hang Yeol claimed that despite knowing that this was a beginner's team, he didn't expect it to be this poor. Jisoo stated that he only signed up seeing how the hero promised to transfer him to a better team after boosting his profile later on. Yet the hero reassured them, stating that he had a plot in mind, otherwise he wouldn't have asked them to join, before stating that they were the strongest of the team. Thus he asked them to expect great things. But the three young men had their doubts. Inside a manager's office, the manager of ESP, Hang Yu Choi, was left particularly annoyed, thinking of how his players weren't deprived of skills and only remembered the taste of defeat. And just as he began to wonder for a solution, he suddenly received a notification from the coach, who explained how PDR asked for a friendly match, stating that all of the players should accept as this was the off-season. The man assumed that he had found the solution to his problem, as the only way to break the cycle of defeat was by scoring victory. And so he immediately contacted the coach to talk about the friendly match, asking him to fix the date for the encounter. Players were wondering about this friendly match, seeing how they don't usually fight in the off-season. They then began to talk about how PDR had a new manager that badmouthed LTT, which they found laughable, seeing how they are certain to lose even against them. As the date of the match arrived, the coach asked the young man if he was sure about his decision, seeing how the protagonist was only recently acquainted with the old members of the team and the new ones needed time to adjust. He explained how they didn't have enough hunters to initiate 7 versus 7 among their own members, and when the man tried to argue further, the hero explained that they needed to do something in order to help this hopeless team, leaving the trainer intrigued yet unsure. The hero explained how they would suffer defeat once again, and keep on occupying the last place, as continuous defeat leads to despair, which will make the players lose their edge. Yet, he affirmed that when the hope to achieve the win exists, things become different for mankind. The hero decided to grant PR hope, as this participation alone could change the tide of the match. And after cracking a smile, the hero was determined to show them that they could also bask in victory. Shortly after, someone approached the hero, claiming that he didn't know if he should address him as president or manager, before presenting himself as the manager of ESP. As the two of them shook hands, the hero realized that the man's eyes lacked seriousness, meaning that he was arrogantly underestimating their abilities. The match was about to begin. Christopher asked his team if they were prepared, affirming that he would be the one leading them while they obeyed carefully to his commands. Even so, he had his doubts in their ability to execute his orders. The hero began to think of how it would be all the existing members of the team, along with him and another new recruit, Yet he was determined to show them that they could achieve victory even like this before turning to Gilhen and demanding him on the front line, before firmly ordering him to maintain his role no matter what unless he says otherwise. Christopher then turned to Yeonju, instructing her to stay close to him and try to synchronize herself with his movements. Dojin Kim then demanded to know his instructions. The hero explained how he wanted his friend to stay in front of him and forbid anyone from approaching, making him speculate that he didn't want him to charge in. But Christopher explained that he would understand when the time comes. With that, the friendly match began as the two teams spawned in front of each other on the map. The manager of ESP recognized it as the Imperial Bridge, a map that limits strategies due to its simple forwardness, meaning that it all came down to the lineup, which is why the manager chose it. Just then, someone pointed out to the manager how solid the formation of this recently put-together team was. Hitchwood explained that this was just for appearance, as they recently had their last match, before pointing out how the formation would crumble once they began to move. This is how it should go. Yet the manager couldn't help but notice how sturdy their vanguard looked. He was then asked if he believed that the hero was the one who trained the team, to which he responded that it would be unveiled during the match. Just then, movement occurred on the map. As the hero used his air anchor to gain some altitude, the enemy team pointed out how vulnerable he was. This pleased the manager, as it seemed like the protagonist lost sight of his own position while instructing the rest of the team. With that being said, one of the enemies charged at him in order to seize this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And so, after changing the grip on his spear, he tried to stop our hero, who suddenly dodged at the last second. Upon seeing this, the manager began to assume that the hero's placement wasn't an error. And after witnessing Dojin Kim take out the spearman, they realized that this was a well-made plan to lure his team in. The manager couldn't believe his own eyes, as he had witnessed a strategy where a role as vital as a marksman had been placed in danger. With that being said, the protagonist aimed his rifle, leaving everyone alerted, thus making the tank hide his team behind him as he began to fear the worst, seeing how the protagonist could turn mana bombers into bullets. Just like that, the shield of the enemy team's vanguard had been shattered to pieces, resulting in a great shockwave on the bridge. The match then ended with PER's absolute victory, leaving the manager of ESP very much baffled, as they had lost to PER in the blink of an eye. Meanwhile, inside the dungeon, upon witnessing what just happened, Gilhen was amazed, seeing how at first he couldn't comprehend the team leader using himself as bait, and yet he managed to grant them victory. After witnessing such a feat, the vanguard couldn't help but be amazed by our hero. After the match, as the members of PER began to talk about how happy they were to achieve victory, our hero began to listen to them pleased when suddenly he was approached by Gilhen, who asked him how he managed to grant them victory. Christopher smiled and asked the young man if he knew about the most vital thing in a lineup fight, to which he responded that it was to keep the formation from falling apart. Yet when he asked him about a way to crumble the enemy's formation, the pro player couldn't find the answer. Christopher explained how the solution was to either let them dismantle the formation themselves or beat them with sheer power. Gilhen was shocked to see that despite how easy the solution sounded, he never thought of it. Christopher explained that he used a technique called Former to bait the enemy into an attacking formation and strike them when switching. With that, the pro player finally understood why the team leader went on his own and left himself wide open. Christopher then pointed out that the young man must be shocked, seeing how easy the solution was, when they were approached by the prodigy, explaining that a good answer was always simple yet unquestionable, before stating how the team must have practiced before he joined, seeing how well synchronized they were. But the sniper explained that they didn't train, and then he only chose a simple lineup. Hangul then realized that this was part of the hero's strategy, and so he asked him if they could always resort to it, as it would surely grant them domination in Division 3, with Dojun and Jisoo strengthening the team. The marksman explained that despite how perfect that sounded, while thinking of how even Division 3 would pose a problem, that they only managed to defeat the team at the 9th place despite having won countless matches, thus they couldn't always use it. This strategy might offer them victory against the weaker teams, but it surely wouldn't work against the stronger ones. Christopher then explained that a strategy would lose efficiency if it became known due to repetition. Jisoo demanded to know the young man's plan, seeing how he only enrolled in PER due to his faith in him. This made our hero recall how Jisoo was the only one on the team, as he was promised that once their profile was raised, he would help him switch into a better one for the sake of his career. He explained to his teammates how they needed to come up with another tactic. Yet the grabbing wielder explained that this would be pointless, seeing how the team was almost deprived of good skills. But just then, our hero cracked a smile, before explaining that they had other assets than skills, leaving his teammates shocked. Yet Jisoo had a hard time following. As the team leader pulled out a mana bomber, the hero explained how they would be resorting to it before firmly affirming that PER would become specialized in mana bombers. Later on in the locker room, Hangul was left baffled as he was asked to train on levitating many swords at once. The president asked him if he had any problems with his training program. A sword prodigy denied it, yet stated that he would have a hard time controlling the swords if there were too many. This made sense to our hero, as the best way to deal with the enemy using sword telekinesis was to use a few blades in order to stay focused. Even so, the hero was well aware that in his past life the sword prodigy could control 7 swords at once and 3 with a great swordsman's mastery, which is why he needed to act in order to make him grow fast. Christopher then pointed out that his training wouldn't be useless, that he wouldn't force the young man to do it in a disappointed tone. Upon hearing this, the sword prodigy was left shocked. Our hero knew very well that Hangul had only joined this team due to his respect toward him, thus this should impact him. In the end, the young man agreed, as this was something he was bound to practice. He asked the coach about the number of swords he wanted him to wield, to which he responded at 7, leaving the young man shocked, as he affirmed that this number should suffice. Later that night, Jisoo was surprised to learn that he was asked to train to accurately drop faraway objects. The hero confirmed, stating that they should be as accurate as possible. The grabby wielder couldn't quite understand it, as his skill was much more effective in offense, and so he demanded to know what our hero had in mind in order to judge if it was worthy of his time. Christopher decided to unveil the strategy to him, and how he planned on making him drop bombs which he didn't quite understand. So the protagonist affirmed that he was talking about mana bombers. The strategy was to attach the fragment of the gadget to the blades of the sword prodigy and have Jisoo use his gravity in order to detach them while the sword was still in the air. In other words, our hero wanted to combine their skills in order to make them the best air force. Jisoo was left shocked by what he had just heard, as the protagonist affirmed that this tactic was called the bomber strategy. Our hero's grand tactic consisted of sending the sword prodigy's blades flying, carrying fragments of mana bombers. They would then be dropped, using the gravity manipulation of Jisoo to accurately strike the enemy, yet only one element remained to complete this tactic, as it could only be realized if the exact location of the target was known. Yet our hero had someone to fill out this role, which was none other than his teammate Yeonju Lee, who possessed the skill positional awareness, allowing her to precisely locate any nearby enemy. Christopher explained how her skill was crucial in order to triangulate the position of the enemy before asking her if she could help them. But the girl anxiously claimed that she didn't have what it takes while playing with her fingers. Suddenly, our hero touched her hand and affirmed that she was the most important element for the tactic to work, stating that the strategy wouldn't be doable if she doesn't contribute. With that, Christopher asked his teammate if she could lend him a hand, and after a small instant of hesitation, she finally agreed to help. Our hero was unable to understand why the face of Yeonju Lee was red, as he had no idea about her way of thinking. Later on, we see the team leader along with 3 of his members in front of cameras. The man shouted that it was now their turn, stating how this was a small interview for the season's opening. The hero began to recall how rudely he acted in the previous interview, which is why he would remain silent this time. Just then, he overheard someone laughing at his team. The man began to explain how the team was surely going to fail with that teenage manager who lacked age and experience. The interviewer tried to downplay the hostile claims of the man, stating that PER might be trying a new method seeing how poorly they did last season. Christopher affirmed that he was a teenager, before stating that once PER crushes the team of you, he will be but an old man with no apparent accomplishments. This greatly angered the man, when suddenly, the interviewer barged in to prevent the situation from escalating, leaving you to boil in his own rage. Christopher was amused to see a team close to their level underestimate them that much, and so he decided to prove the worth of his team to you during the first match. Later on, our hero had an anchor at hand. The sword prodigy asked him if he was certain about his decision. So the protagonist explained how tactics were to be adopted quickly, before pointing out that theirs couldn't be outplayed with ease even if revealed early. The young man didn't oppose it but still had his doubts. This made the president realize that Hangul must think that they could win against the 8th-ranked team by fighting normally. The hero was well aware that in case of this tactic's adoption, he would be doing most of the work, yet he also knew that this wouldn't benefit the current PR. Christopher reminded his teammate that he was one of the main factors for the bomber strategy to succeed, making him assure that he would do what he could. With this, the hero was left pleased, and so our hero, along with his team, made their way into the arena. Christopher was determined to show the worth of PER to the others as he approached the sound of the crowd. According to the rules, the team with the lower place in the ranking had the right to choose the arena in the Hunters League, and since PER was at the lowest place, they had the privilege of selecting the battlefield, and so they went for the map known as City Arena. The hero then contacted his bombing squad teammates, stating that they would execute the tactic once they were well placed, before asking the 3 others to take on as many opponents as possible while trying to evade death. Yeonju Lee informed the others that she positioned herself on a high floor of a building at the far east of the map, and that she would wait in the office that was to the far left. With that being said, she activated her skill awareness, allowing her to triangulate exactly the location of the targets and reveal them to the rest of her team. This made the protagonist think of how useful this ability was when used on big maps. The girl then informed her teammates of the exact location where their enemies were supposed to meet, and so the protagonist opened his map in order to mark and see the exact location. With everyone in position, the hero stated that they would nuke the building and that he would shoot anyone who tried to flee the scene. Christopher then explained that in case they tried to evade his bullets, they would make them the direct target of the bomber's tactic. The hero then asked everyone if they were prepared, to which they responded by stating that everything was in place. This pleased our hero, who prepared his rifle, as they could finally commence. With that being said, blades carrying fragments of mana bombers began to cross the sky. The sniper stood silent and ready for action in his hiding spot. He then asked his teammates to proceed with the bombing. Just like that, a fragment of the mana bomber was detached from one of the blades, leaving it to fall in the building. Meanwhile, inside the building where the enemy team patiently waited, one of the players recalled how their coach asked them to be wary of today's enemy. The man stated that despite the protagonist being young, they shouldn't do anything rash after underestimating him. The player speculated that they wouldn't need a complicated plan in order to deal with a beginner like our hero, yet he and his team decided to go all out. The player planned to use his skill devastating strides that could cause an earthquake in order to catch the enemy by surprise once they show themselves. With that, he was eager for them to arrive, as he deeply desired to slay them. But just then, the mana bomber fragments were detached from the sword. The players were confused upon seeing the roof above them trembling, and so the player urged his team to use mana shields to defend themselves. Just like that, the players found a way to protect themselves from the falling rubble. The boy recalled how the protagonist tried to make the building collapse back in the competition, and so he predicted that he would use such tactic, assuming that the hero resorted to the power of the artifact in order to make the building collapse, meaning that he must be running low on mana. When suddenly he was left intrigued by seeing 3 flying blades outside. This intriguing scenery left the enemy team alerted. One of the players recognized it to be the sword prodigy's skill, while the one with the orange hair realized that the enemy must be trying to kill him remotely, and so he asked his teammates to take care of the blades. With that being said, he began to use his own sword in order to counter the levitating ones. Just then, the gravity skill was activated, unleashing all the fragments of the mana bombers upon the confused enemy team. The player realized that he was now on the brink of defeat, as a great explosion occurred. Just like that, the young one was plunged into great pain. However, he managed to survive. The young man was blown away by the fact that the blade exploded. Meanwhile, someone was waiting outside of the collapsing building. After that, one of the escaping players appeared in his scope. He quickly eliminated him with a single bullet. The sniper was left pleased as his intervention was little needed. He realized that the enemy decided to rely on long-range attacks, seeing how they were at a disadvantage when facing the blades in close combat. That this would reveal itself to be a difficult task, seeing that the one manipulating the blades was the sword prodigy himself. With that being said, our hero realized that their victory was now guaranteed. As the match came to an end, Team TD suffered a crushing defeat. Upon seeing this, the man was left baffled, as he had never come across such a tactic. Jin Han Lee, who manages the first division of LTD, didn't expect such a scenery in the low leagues. The manager then asked his colleague if the tactician was the protagonist who caused the trouble at the Division 3 interview. The man confirmed and forcibly admitted that the hero had as much bite as he had bark. Our hero had made a great impression on the first division manager. The man then asked for the reason behind them not trying to recruit Christopher, but his colleague affirmed that they did. But it looked like the hero was already connected with Team PR. How he immediately refused all the generous offers they made him. Jin Han Lee stated that regret was now pointless before demanding the Division 2 team to contact our hero. The man looked at the sniper with great interest. Back to Team PR's victory. The young man was still baffled by their own success, stating how they had finally earned themselves a win. Yanju Lee was also impressed. The team leader explained that they shouldn't be so excited over their first victory, and that they will celebrate after the interview. He also predicted that the sword prodigy would be crowned MVP of the match. Later on, the interview with the MVP of the match started, which was none other than Hang Yul Yun. The interviewer asked the young one about the solution that his team, who arrived last season, used to achieve this great victory. Hang Yul explained how he simply followed the team leader's instruction, which greatly intrigued the journalist. The sword prodigy affirmed once again that he only obeyed Christopher's orders. With that, the man stated that social media was going wild over the strategy, comparing it to advanced military tactics. But to his shock, the MVP of the match stated that their team leader described this strategy in a similar manner, before pointing out how their tactic had been perfect during the entire match and how he only had respect for him. Upon hearing this, the hero was baffled, as his teammate was using his shining moment to talk about him. This made Dojun Kim state that the sniper currently almost looked like the owner of a cult, when suddenly someone confirmed. Their teammate stated that Mr. Christopher deserved to be treated as such. The protagonist found himself quite intrigued by this odd behavior, and so he asked his teammate to drop the formalities, as it wasn't proper seeing how the player was his senior. This left our hero's teammate quite embarrassed. Christopher was very well aware that his team must be filled with joy upon achieving their first victory in a long time. He was also certain that PER will gain in power, and certainly dominate the Division 3 league. After slurping his noodles, the blonde one noticed our hero passing by, so he asked him if he was going somewhere on his vacation day. The team leader explained how he was going to see someone before asking his friend not to slack off as they were in the season despite it being the weekend. With that being said, the sniper bid the swordsman farewell. Dojin Kim finished drinking his soup and placed the bowl on the table before deciding to watch his TV shows. Shortly after, in front of the stadium of the Hunters League, someone waved to our hero, as it turned out to be Min-suk Lee, who our hero quickly greeted. The man affirms to the teenager that he had arrived just in time. Christopher asked him if they could enter, which he confirmed. Hunting passionates and excited cheers filled the stadium. Our hero calmly sat down in his seat. Min-suk Lee asked our hero if he had watched main matches, seeing how he seemed to know the stadium well, which our hero found funny, seeing how much time he had spent here in his past life. Yet he claimed that it was because he was a pro player. Min-suk Lee, who wasn't convinced, expressed how happy he was that the hero could come, feeling that he might have work on his day off as they were in season. Christopher thanked the man for inviting him to see Korea versus Japan, which was a match that their country usually loses. The hero then asked if this confrontation was worth watching, making the man point out how cruel he was towards Korea. Min-suk Lee claimed that despite Japan being a powerful team, their opponents possessed some of the finest Division I Korean hunters. The hero found himself displeased by the current situation of his country, so Min-suk Lee claimed that the members of their national team weren't particularly weak, and that he wanted the hero to witness this match as he would one day fight in the name of his country, which is why he wanted him to avenge them. The man then explained that this wasn't his only reason for bringing him here, as he wanted to introduce him to one of his friends on the Japanese side. With that, the sniper finally understood it all, as Min-suk Lee truly believed in his potential, and so he decided to carefully observe the match in order to assess his country's current situation. The match came to an end, as Min-suk Lee claimed that they should get on their way. The Korean team lost the match as it only managed to take down 2 Japanese hunters. As the hero pointed out how they were defeated, Min-suk Lee proposed to go see his foreign friend, making the hero realize that despite the man pretending like he didn't care, he seemed quite irritated by this defeat. Upon seeing him holding down his frustration, the hero proposed to go meet the Japanese hunter. Shortly after, our heroes were waiting, until the Korean hunter was finally noticed and waved at him. This was none other than one of the Japanese national hunters, Takumi Minamino. The two friends quickly greeted each other with a hug. Takumi Minamino called out his friend for not going to greet his countrymen first, but Min-suk Lee affirmed that the generation was hopeless and that he would be betting on the hunters of the future. And so he introduced our hero to his friend, who was the most well-known current aggressive marksman in Japan. Before presenting to Takumi Minamino our protagonist, who he described as a promising talent who had just entered the hunting world. With that, the both of them shook hands. The Japanese hunter began to observe the young man, before asking his friend if he was allowed to assess his skills. Yet Min-suk Lee affirmed to the Japanese hunter that he should ask the young one directly. Christopher quickly realized that Takumi Minamino must have retired from the hunting world in his time, seeing how he couldn't remember his name. And so he decided to use his all-seeing eye in order to take a look at his attributes. The man's skills allowed him to fire consecutive projectiles, quickly increase the damage inflicted upon hitting the same spot twice, as well as great mobility. The hero could also see the man's attributes. With that, Christopher was left overjoyed at the opportunity to duel with the most famous and aggressive Japanese marksman, and so he quickly accepted Takumi Minamino's offer. The man claimed that the teenager possessed a fiery determination, so the hero responded that he had much more to offer. With that, tension began to rise between the marksmen as Min-suk Lee found himself already tired by their confrontation. Upon seeing how Korea had lost, the suit pointed out how he had assumed that they were now on par with the Japanese. So the player explained how they had improved as they had almost killed one more enemy, but the man affirmed that this was much harder than it seemed. The man then burst out at Jeonyep Kang, screaming that they were defeated despite having the best, before stating that he won't send any more players if this keeps going on. With that, the suit angrily exited the room, leaving Jeonyep Kang alone with Director Lee. The player asked the director if he had found any promising talent among LTD members when scouting Divisions 3 and 2. This made the man think of how he managed to find great potential like the prodigy swordsman and how they were not part of LTD. The director realized that a duel between the gravity wielder and the sword prodigy would be a great asset even for a Division 1 team. The man then began to wonder about our hero who had won the TV show competition, thinking that Korea might be in need of the likes of him. But the man decided to quickly brush these thoughts off, as they were all teenagers in Division 3 that couldn't possibly satisfy his wild demands. The hero found himself in a training room along with a foreigner and his friend. Min-suk Lee began to think of how his friend aimed to cause trouble once again, as he was still the same man he knew when they were teammates on the international team. Min-suk Lee asked his friend, who claimed to want to assess the young man's strength, as he only wanted to fight him. And so he asked Takumi and not fight at full strength. Yet the man affirmed that he was already aware that he was up against a Division 3 Korean player, and so he affirmed that he would be going easy on the young man. Our hero then noticed Min-suk Lee laughing, and so he cracked up a smile of his own, which somehow provoked the Japanese hunter, making Min-suk Lee realize that both marksmen were hard to deal with. So the video ends here. If you don't want to miss the next part, activate the notification bell, and see you next time on Tob's channel.